Committee Room 21. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. 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 Sound.
folks, welcome to the Infrastructure Committee meeting. I'm in the chair today in the absence of the chair, Peter Martin, who's unwell, and we send our best wishes to him for a swift recovery. Today the committee will hear oral evidence from the environmental stakeholders on the Water, Sustainable Drainage and Flood Management Bill. We will also receive oral evidence from Mobile UK and Mobile Infrastructure Forum on addressing planning barriers facing the telecommunications industry, and consider two proposals, SL1 for statutory rules that are subject to assembly procedure and 4 not subject to assembly procedure. And I just want to inform those in the gallery that they are very welcome, first of all, and are permitted to use Wi-Fi connection, but all devices must be muted. 3, 4 and 5G is not permitted, and no recordings or photographs should be taken. And if members are content, we'll proceed to the agenda. Before I do so, I believe we've got a few members of the gallery, and just to welcome Daniel and Ruby, is it from Bangor Academy and from INST today? You're very welcome. I know you're on work experience, and I hope you're enjoying your week. It's great to see you. So before we proceed, are there any apologies?
None received, Chair. None received.
Okay. And just joining us online currently is Militia, and I believe that Justin will be joining us online as well. Good morning, Peter. And moving on, item 2 then, declarations of interest. Members, you are reminded and obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interest that might reasonably be thought by others to influence your approach. Do any members have any declarations of interest? Nope. Okay, on the chairperson's business, I have nothing at this stage, so move on to the draft minutes. Page 7, draft minutes of the proceedings of last week's meeting are available. Can I get agreement that they are true and accurate record of the meeting, and if so, I'll sign them. Don't all speak at once.
Yes.
Great. Okay, item 5, matters arising from last week's minutes. Page 16, the Assembly Research and Information Service planning application data. Can I advise members that at its meeting last week, the committee received a briefing from the Assembly Research and Information Service, during which the research officer undertook to provide some additional information on performance by local councils with regards to planning timescales. Can I ask members if you're content to note the information, or do you have any comments or questions at this stage? Noted then.
Noted, Chair.
Thank you. Page 18, the Assembly Research and Information Service structural maintenance on public roads across Northern Ireland, Great Britain and Ireland. At this meeting last week, you'll be aware, members, that we agreed to seek some further comparative research on the approaches in other jurisdictions around roads maintenance. A copy of that research paper is in your packs. Are you content to note the information, or do you have any comment?
Noted, Chair.
Noted, thank you. Are there any other matters arising from last week's meeting that members wish to raise? No. Okay, moving on to correspondence. At page 31, you will see the correspondence memo. At page 43, there is a response from the Minister for Infrastructure to the committee's correspondence requesting clarification on plans to develop a more collaborative approach between key stakeholders around the supply of grit during periods of low temperatures. Can I get agreement from the committee to write to the Minister to ask which councils the department has an agreed moratorium of understanding with? Agreed, thank you. Any other points on that? I know there was a decent discussion on that a few weeks ago regarding that, members. Is there anything else you wish to chase up? No? Okay, page 45, there is a response from the Minister to the committee correspondence seeking a view on the issue of creating an offence of recording images at road traffic collisions and whether responsibility rests with the department to bring forward legislative changes. Can I get agreement to note this at this stage, members, and forward it to the Committee for Justice?
Noted, Chair.
Thank you. At page 52, there's correspondence from the Half Fair Unfair regarding a campaign for free transport for disabled people. Can I get agreement to request written evidence from the campaign? I think it would be useful to get that at this stage on their case for provision for free travel.
Great.
Thank you. And then we can follow that up, members, potentially with a briefing or a discussion following that. Okay, and can I get agreement then to note the remaining correspondence unless any member has an issue they want to discuss from the correspondence? Justin?
Yes, just very briefly, how long does the Minister have to respond to correspondence from our committee?
My understanding is it's not a set time scale. It does vary from case to case, but the clerks will probably keep me right.
We usually ask 2 weeks, but generally, yeah, we usually ask for a 2-week turnaround for
2 weeks. Right. How long is it since we've written to the Minister on the illegal Sinn Féin billboard at the Egyptian Arch in Newry?
Just to update, a response has been received today. I think it was 2 weeks ago since the last meeting that it was discussed again following the motion in the Assembly. So that's been received, but too late to be in the packs. I think it made the table pack, sure it didn't. So it'll be in the pack for next week, Justin.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Any other issues, members? Okay. Moving on to item 7 then, is our first evidence session on the water, sustainable drainage, flood management, environmental stakeholders, oral evidence. At page 55 is the clerk's memo. At page 59 is a report from the RSPB with written evidence. At page 61, written evidence from the Woodland Trust. At page 63, the Northern Ireland Marine Task Force written evidence. And at page 68, the Northern Ireland Marine Task Force Nature-Based Solutions briefing to support the Climate Action Plan. And we're just waiting for our representatives. While we're waiting, folks, can I get agreement that we take this evidence recorded by Hansard?
Aye, Chair.
Thank you. Where are you going to be on?
Just while they can sort.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to be creative. While we're waiting for the evidence session, we'll move on to item 9, which is the SL1 and the on-street parking amendment order, Northern Ireland 2026. And at page 81, you'll see the clerk's memo, the on-street parking amendment order for Northern Ireland 2026, 6th of February. Page 82 is the SL1, the on-street parking amendment order, Northern Ireland 2026. Page 84 is the draft order SR 2026, the on-street parking amendment order 2026. The purpose of the proposed statutory rule is to suspend the charging of tariffs on New Year's Day and St Patrick's Day or days in lieu for the vehicles using a parking place within a controlled parking zone. The proposed rule is not subject to Assembly procedure. The proposal was received by the committee on the 7th of January and was noted at its meeting on the 14th of January. Committee staff followed the new procedure for handling delegated legislation and published the proposal on the website, and also published its citizen space survey, which closed on the 27th of January with no responses received. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule?
Content.
Any comments? Nope. Thank you. Start with this, folks. Back on. Okay, item 10 is the SL1, the Roads Races Circuit of Ireland Rally Order, Northern Ireland 2026. Members, at page 87 of the clerk's memo, the Road Races Circuit of Ireland Rally Order, Northern Ireland 2026, 6th of February. At page 89, the SL1, the Road Races Circuit of Ireland Rally Order, Northern Ireland 2026. At page 97 is the draft order SR1 2026, the Road Races Circuit of Ireland Rally Order, Northern Ireland. And at page 92-96 are the maps of the Circuit of Ireland Rally. The purpose of the statutory rule is to permit the suspension of the right-of-way of traffic on Friday the 3rd of April 2026 and Saturday the 4th of April between specified times and lengths of a number of roads within the counties of Armagh and Tyrone to allow the Ulster Automobile Club Limited promoters of the Circuit of Ireland Rally 2026 to run the event. That was a mouthful. The proposed rule is not subject to Assembly procedure. The proposal was received by the committee on the 7th of January and was noted at the meeting on the 14th of January. Committee staff followed the new procedure for handling delegated legislation and published the proposal on the website, and also published the citizen space survey, which closed on the 27th of January with no responses received. Are members content with the statutory rule?
And me and Harry have no issues with that rule.
You have to declare an interest then?
Ready to go? We're not declaring interest today, but we're
I'm happy, and I'm sure the Circuit of Ireland Rally will be happy as well that has gone through. Then at item 11 is the SL1, the Road Races Craig Anglet Hill Climb Order, Northern Ireland 2026. Page 107 of the clerk's memo is the Road Races Craig Anglet Hill Climb Order, Northern Ireland 2026. Page 108 is the SL1, the Road Races Craig Anglet Hill Climb Order 2026 at page 111 are the maps and signage of the road races Craigantlet Hill Climb. At page 114 is the draft order SR 2026, the road races Craigantlet Hill order. Seek agreement from you members, if I can, to note receipt of the SL1 and the proposed statutory rule, which will be published as part of the call for views, to agree that the SL1 will be considered at the meeting on the 11th of March, and to indicate whether you're content that a briefing from officials is not required at this stage. I don't believe that it is. I've got enough there. Thank you. Just keep going, Michael.
Yep, please.
Thank you. And item 12 is the SL1 on the Motor Vehicles Exchangeable Licence Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2026. At page 119 is the clerk's memo on this, dated the 4th of February. At page 120 is the SL1, the Motor Vehicles Exchange Licences Amended Order. And at page 123 is the draft order. Can I get agreement members to note receipt again of the SL1 and the proposed statutory rule, which will be published as part of the call for views, and to agree that the SL1 will be considered at the briefing on the 11th of March? And can you also indicate whether you're content that a briefing from the officials is not required?
And Chair.
Thank you. Item 13 is the SL1, the Road Races Northwest 200 order. At page 127, the clerk's memo, the Road Races Northwest 200 order, dated the 4th of February. At page 128 is the SL1. Page 131 is the map of the Road Races Northwest 200 order, and at page 132 you will see the draft order SR 2026, the Road Races Northwest order. Can I get agreement members to note again receipt of the SL1 and the proposed statutory rule, which will be published as part of the call for views, and to agree that the SL1 will be considered again at the 11th of March meeting, and content that there'll be no briefing from officials. Thank you. Item 14 is the SL1, the Road Races Cookstown 100 Motorcycle Road Race Order Northern Ireland 2026. At page 138 you'll see the clerk's memo, page 139 is the SL1, and at page 142 is the circuit map. And page 143 is the draft order SR 2026. Again, can I seek agreement to note the receipts and that all views will be available on the meeting and considered at the meeting on the 11th of March, and that will not require a briefing from the officials.
Trade.
Thank you.
A lot of petrol power today.
So absolutely, the motor racing fraternity of Northern Ireland will be very happy after today's meeting.
Well done, Harry. Well done.
So continue to 15 and 16, and then if the witness has a chair.
I could do that.
No problem.
Matters arise.
We're going to have the agenda finished before we begin today, folks. That's the plan. So we're moving on to the forward work. We're moving on to the forward work programme at page 148.
Harry, he's sucking diesel today. He's sucking diesel.
We are.
It's not even petrol anymore.
We're in fifth gear, Colin, but we haven't even started yet. The forward work programme is at page 148. You will see the draft forward work programme. Can I get agreement to proceed with the evidence sessions as laid out? And it does reflect any decisions taken today. We haven't actually taken any decisions today, but we may well do, and we'll factor that in at the end. But at this moment in time, are we content to note the draft forward work programme?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. I'm not doing A or B yet because we haven't quite got there. In the absence still, members of the witnesses, I think we'll suspend for 5 minutes or as long as is required, and then come back whenever that happens. Meeting is currently adjourned.
Come back here.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Invite our first witnesses in.
Rather than... Excellent. And I'll tell you the reason why is because we did a clock before we got back up. One of the committee clerks and another committee.
John Martin.
We're doing
How you doing today?
So folks, you're all very welcome. Welcome to the Infrastructure Committee. We appreciate you coming along. So, members, we have joining us Robert Walsh from the Northern Ireland Marine Task Force, Dr. Sharon Thompson from the RSPB, and John Martin from the Woodland Trust. And online, I believe we have Dr. Brona McNeill from the Northern Ireland Environment Link. And there you are, Brona. Can you hear us and see us? Excellent. So far, so good. Folks, you're very welcome to come along and to brief us on your findings and research and thoughts on the Water Sustainable Drainage and Flood Management Bill. We'll hand over to yourselves, if that's okay, for 5 to 10 minutes worth of contributions, however you wish to split it up between yourselves. Then we'll come back to myself and members for questions, and we'll take it from there. So thank you. Crack on, whoever wants to take the lead.
Yep, hi. Thanks everyone. Thanks Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to give evidence today. As we heard earlier, my name is Brona McNeill. I'm Area Lead for Freshwater at NI Environment Link, or NEIL. NEIL is a networking and forum body for environmental organisations across NI. And in that sense, I'm speaking on behalf of our members who work to protect nature, improve climate resilience, and tackle the environmental challenges that are raised by flooding and water pollution. So I'm just going to make a couple of introductory comments for 5 or 10 minutes, as said, and then we can, I'm sure my colleagues will be able to come in and help with answering any questions that you have. So I suppose overall, it's important to say we welcome the intent behind the bill. NI urgently needs a modern, integrated approach to water management. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and decades of underinvestment mean that the status quo is no longer viable, environmentally, but also socially and economically. So our core message this morning is that if done properly, this bill is a vital opportunity to improve homes, lives, and nature, but only if it's sufficiently ambitious and properly resourced. And as such, we feel the bill needs to be strengthened in order to ensure its long-term impact and also to maximise the potential environmental benefits that it could bring. So if it's okay with members, I'll just go through a couple of the areas in which we think that the bill could be strengthened. And again, happy to take any questions afterwards. So I suppose just a couple of points about the use of SUDs generally. You know, as we know, flooding is no longer an exceptional event, and across NI we're seeing repeated surface water flooding and overwhelmed drainage systems. So we really strongly support the bill's recognition that conventional drainage solutions alone cannot cope with the more intense rainfall that we're likely to see over the coming years. So SUDs have to be central to our response here, but for SUDs to work effectively, they must be mandatory and not optional. They must be designed for long-term performance and they must be maintained properly over time. So we're concerned that without clear statutory duties related to their use, SUDs risk being watered down in practice or value engineered out of developments. And so we would suggest that in Section 2, the bill could explicitly require that SUDs are the default for new development and retrofit. As mentioned as well, with SUDs, the design stage is critical, as is appropriate construction, operation, and ongoing maintenance. So for these reasons, we feel that regional guidance on the design and maintenance standards of SUDs is absolutely essential. So without clear, consistent guidance, there's a real risk that SUDs will be implemented unevenly or treated as an afterthought or just reduced to kind of tokenistic features that fail to deliver the full potential of SUDs. So for this reason as well, we feel that Section 2 could be strengthened to say that the regulations must, maybe rather than may, make provision about design, construction and operation of SUDs and issue clear and consistent guidance on design and maintenance standards. So moving on then to say a couple of things about nature-based solutions. And for us, really, this is the greatest opportunity represented by this bill is the potential to embed nature-based solutions into law. So I'm sure members are familiar with the concept of nature-based solutions, but we know that these approaches reduce flood risk, support biodiversity recovery, improve well-being and placemaking by enhancing public spaces. They're often more resilient to climate extremes, and they're often cheaper over their lifetime than hard infrastructure. So on this, we feel the bill could be more explicit in prioritising the use of nature-based solutions as a category of sustainable drainage system and could, for example, require decision makers to justify where they're not used rather than giving the option to use them. Nature-based solutions are already, as we know, embedded in the Climate Change NI Act 2022, and SUDs provide a practical mechanism for delivering on some of those climate commitments. I know my colleague Robert will be able to say more about nature-based solutions and the source to sea approach in that context. You know, the value of taking that wider view and thinking about a catchment scale approach. Relatedly, I had some comments to make about water quality and the wider environmental context of all of this. So I'm sure I don't have to rehearse that Northern Ireland's water quality statistics paint a pretty sobering picture. The majority of our rivers and lakes are failing to meet good ecological status, and excess nutrients and sewage spills, as well as polluted runoff, are impacting not only our environment, but our communities and our economy as well. So nature-based SUDs are not just about flood prevention. They're a really powerful tool for actually improving water quality by filtering pollutants, and they can contribute to both nature recovery and climate targets. So we urge the committee to ensure that the bill explicitly links the use of SUDs for flood management with achieving Water Framework Directive objectives, with nature recovery targets. We know the nature recovery strategy is coming down the track, and with meeting climate legislation commitments as well. We would also encourage stronger protections for high value receiving waters, such as those in protected areas or those where there are sensitive fisheries, because even small changes in sediment, nutrients or flow can cause disproportionate harm to those areas. So enhanced requirements for nature-based SUDs in those catchments and those areas would ensure that the bill delivers real, measurable environmental gains where they matter the most. And we also suggest that Section 8 of the bill could explicitly articulate some of those more specific risks. Just a few comments then about governance and funding, which I know is covered in the bill. We would suggest that the bill should provide greater statutory clarity in relation to the approval, funding, adoption and maintenance of SUDs. So in particular, it should clearly define responsibilities, and it should require the department to ensure that long-term adequate funding arrangements are in place. So our recommendations on some of the governance and funding questions are, we recommend a hybrid governance and approval model with statutory approval of SUDs design and construction resting with local authorities, and technical sign-off provided by NI Water, where SUDs connect to or form part of the public drainage or wastewater system. So we know that nature-based SUDs, as I said, are not just engineering assets, but they also deliver placemaking, biodiversity and community benefits. So local authorities for us are therefore the best placed to integrate SUDs early into development design and wider blue-green infrastructure networks, while of course NI Water's engineering expertise is essential to ensure system performance. In relation to funding, we support a blended funding model with combining public funding with developer fees. So we would suggest that core policy, oversight and enforcement functions should be publicly funded, while transactional costs such as application processing and inspections should be covered through developer fees. So that would protect public finances, and also it would incentivize good quality design from the beginning. In relation to adoption and maintenance, we again suggest a hybrid approach here. So we would suggest that NI Water should adopt sewer-like or below ground components, while local authorities should adopt accessible above ground features where capacity allows. Private management arrangements, we would suggest, should only be used with robust legal safeguards in place. So the key message here is that clear maintenance duties and funding arrangements are essential to avoid poorly maintained or orphaned assets, which would of course undermine the whole objective of the bill and its potential for environmental improvement. So finally, just a wider point about the importance of using a place-based approach. So I know I mentioned that in relation to local authorities playing a vital role in SUDS approval and design, and just the importance of embedding this place-based approach in the bill. So, I mean, we know, as I've kind of alluded to, the bill isn't just about managing water. It's about how we plan places, and it has the potential to deliver multiple environmental benefits, as we've said, but also to deliver benefits for communities in terms of potential amenity value and the creation of greener and healthier environments and neighbourhoods. So I know the committee will be aware of the 4 pillars of sustainable drainage systems: water quality, quantity, amenity and biodiversity. And we would suggest that the bill should more clearly ensure that all 4 of these pillars are delivered. And I know that some of my colleagues will be able to say a little bit more about that. So in conclusion, then, we support the direction of travel of the bill, but we urge the committee to strengthen it by ensuring that SUDs are mandatory with clear guidance as to their design and maintenance, Nature-based solutions are prioritised. The bill is adequately integrated with other environmental policy areas. The 4 pillars of sustainable drainage systems are delivered. Statutory responsibilities are clear, and funding is realistic and long-term. So again, thanks very much for the opportunity to submit evidence, and really happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Dr. McNeill. Does anyone else from the panel want to make any contributions at this stage, or are you happy to go into questions?
Happy to take questions, at this stage.
Okay, I think that was really useful, and I appreciate you covering particularly some aspects of the bill and clause by clause that you think could be strengthened. I think that's always very beneficial for the committee. I'm going to try and cover, if I may, some of the areas maybe that weren't discussed then, and then we'll open up to other members. So just in relation to clause 1 around the water bans, do you have any concerns or any feelings around the temporary use of water bans, particularly in relation to the potential impacts on wildlife or habitats? Do you think it goes far enough? Do you think it goes too far? Or are you content with the general gist of and the purpose of that clause?
I don't have any specific comments to make about clause 1, so I'll pass over to other panel members.
The sector doesn't have a position on that in particular, but I suppose in line with kind of climate predictions and climate adaptation and resilience, the climate action plan, there should be read across to the climate action plan when those clauses are due to come in. So an important part of this bill, I think, with any sort of legislation is policy coherence and legislative coherence across a range of different areas. So although the Department of Infrastructure will be the competent authority managing this bill, there is read across with a range of other areas that DERA would traditionally manage. So I think important to kind of have that in mind when thinking about bringing in any bans and the potential impact on wildlife and other areas of life, what that would affect. So although the sector doesn't have a specific position on that, and each event kind of will be determined by the decision making at the time, it's really important that there is read across those other pieces of legislation.
Okay, thanks for that. Anybody else at this stage? No? Okay, moving on. You'll be aware that currently SUDS provisions don't contribute to the 10% of open space on new developments. Should that continue to be the case, or do you think there's a creative way that we could go about including them? Obviously, it's been prohibitive to developers up until this point, particularly whenever they've had to create a certain amount of open space, while also factoring in SUDS. So I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think if there wasn't a need for this clause within the bill, then it wouldn't have come forward. So, we clearly see the need for more open space and green space and the multiple benefits that provides, both from biodiversity enhancement, but also how that delivers sustainably for those places, but also health and wellbeing benefits for those local communities that could potentially benefit from those spaces. So the enhanced, the Water and Sewage Services Act 2016, made the provision for SUDS originally. And in the past 10 years, we have seen very little development of that, which is why this kind of piece of legislation is coming forward to ensure that SUDS is enhanced and prioritised. So, we would support seeing more open space and SUDS going into those spaces, but not in the way that is currently provided for within the legislation. So as Brona had said, those 4 pillars around what SUDS can deliver are really important, and Sharon might want to say a wee bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was going to pick up on that point. I mean, I think it's thinking about what is the wider value that the SUDS programme can bring to the development, to the people that are living there, but also sort of nature and the environment, and those wider benefits. And I think at the moment what we're seeing is predominantly a situation where it's trying to get the water off site as quickly as possible, usually into sort of just a big hole at one corner of the development that then sort of dries up for the rest of the year. If properly designed and produced, you can get sort of lots of amenity value from it. You can have lots of nice green spaces, lots of nature, wildlife, water, and that also brings sort of cooling benefits to your development and stuff around your urban area. But I think what we were concerned about is that we've talked about the 4 pillars, so that's water quantity, which includes flow as well as volume, water quality, biodiversity and amenity. And I think we have quite a large concern that the definition in 4.41 about sustainable drainage system isn't actually sustainable. It only covers water volume and water flow. So where are the other 3 pillars in terms of sustainable urban drainage in this context? So I think without that, you're not going to get those benefits, and that's why people question SUDS, because you're not actually delivering a SUDS program, you're just delivering a pipe that gets the water out really quickly. So I think to actually deliver the benefits that the bill is trying to achieve, that is a starting point, because this is your definition. Everything else will fall from that. So all the other points that Brona made will then be feeding back into this definition. And if we don't build in the other 3 pillars, why would the rest of the legislation speak to them?
That's really useful. Just coming back to a point then that Brona raised around the maintenance and upkeep, both underground and overground. To me, this is a key issue. It's all well and good having the rules and the legislation in place, but we know on developments where there's shared green space that's often not maintained, and the residents get very frustrated, or on the fringes of developments or whatever it might be, and it falls into this black hole of responsibility. How key is it that that is nailed down at the earliest possible stages, and where else does it particularly well? So I know when, as elected representatives, when we try to get hedges cut or green spaces or parks repaired that were part of open spaces, or anything that is for the shared use of that development, it is invariably very difficult, particularly after the developer moves on within a couple of years. So really keen to dive into that and how you think that can be done most effectively and efficiently.
Yeah, so if I could just come in on that one. Like, our key point, as you say, this is absolutely critical to the overall success of the bill, is just, and our key point about governance and funding is that unclear responsibility would undermine the delivery of everything that follows. And so we would strongly agree that having those statutory responsibilities explicitly clear from the earliest possible opportunity is absolutely key to success. We submitted our response to the consultation just before Christmas on SUDS and new housing developments. We included some examples of where this has been done well. So there's some examples from Wales, particularly where this kind of hybrid approach has been adopted, and it's very much, as we sort of mentioned, it's a place-based and kind of site-specific approach to divvying up those kind of responsibilities around ongoing maintenance and funding. And I think that is the best approach, is to take a sort of pragmatic approach to what would work best in that site. I don't know if any other panel members have comments on any other case studies or examples of where it's been done well.
Well, SUDS as a system of managing water is not new. So it's been around for 30 years, maybe more. So, I think part of this is like, let's get on and do it. So, the legislation, of course, needs to be right to set the baseline for how this should be managed going forward. But this is not new. There's countless examples of successful projects all around the world. We are kind of behind in terms of the development of this. So it's great, it's really positive to see this piece of legislation, but it's really important actually we get on and do this. I think subsection 6B in the legislation makes the case for adoption by public authorities, which is good. However, the maintenance bit, as you flagged, John, is missing. So adoption and maintenance is something there that is really important going forward, because if these sites are left and not maintained, then they become a problem. Just in terms of the role of trees, I guess, within that. Speaking from the Woodland Trust, and from a maintenance point of view, again, really important that the right trees are put in the right place and specific species are chosen for the outcome that they're trying to achieve. And I think that sometimes I think the role of SUDS can be overplayed in terms of actually flood management. So SUDS in a suds in an urban setting, flooding usually happens in an urban setting after an extreme rainfall event, and suds have a certain role to play within that. But actually, thinking of this holistically, suds needs to be thought at a catchment scale. So although trees on woodland in an urban setting won't prevent an extreme flooding event in that urban setting, trees and woodlands at the catchment scale upstream of that event has a significant impact on reducing flooding and flood risk. So I think when we're thinking about suds, yes, of course, think about adoption, maintenance and all of that comes with it, but we actually need to think about a catchment scale, especially places where we are getting regular flood events and where flooding is becoming more pertinent in the wider countryside.
Oh, thanks, John.
Can I just add to that? Sorry. So one of the things that was interesting in looking at this is that there's in clauses plus 2, 3A and 4A, there's talk about removal of suds. So it's not myself, but my colleagues who are sort of more expert in this sort of question the fact, why would you actually need to remove suds? That implies they were poorly designed. And so therefore, in terms of maintenance and looking after the having the water open in sort of systems that allow you easy access to it are more easy to maintain than undergrounding everything and putting it through pipes. So that's probably one area to consider as part of this, is how much can the legislation push towards that more sort of open access to the water that helps that. And interestingly, Brona sort of referred to the Llanelli example in South Wales, which tends to be quoted in every example in talking about suds. But the Belfast City Council Supplementary Planning Guidance is produced by people that we, the RSPB and Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, have worked with in terms of sort of what does best practice look like in terms of suds. So you have an at-home example that you could be looking at to sort of say, well, this is what a really good suds scheme in an urban area looks like. But I just want to reiterate John's point that it's not about just only dealing with the water once it's reached your urban conurbation. It's how are we managing the habitats that will absorb and reduce the flow of water and increase its quality, etc. outside there. What are those habitats? So things like peatland restoration, wetland creation and stuff like that. That means there'll be less water coming in the first place.
Okay, no, that is really useful. One of my main concerns goes back to the maintenance, just that we see quite often when new developments are built, the open spaces are put in, there's an issue, a period of goodwill that exists maybe with local government or with maintenance companies, but quite quickly it disappears, and a few years down the line we're sitting with asking the question who's responsible for this, and that would be a big fear. So I do agree, I think it needs to be factored in. My last point before I open up the members then is just around clause 11, which gives powers to remedy unlawful sewer connections, and I'm just interested to know if you have any opinions on how important this provision will be in protecting both water quality and habitats, and if you think there's any way that could be strengthened in terms of the wording.
I have a point on that one. So I wasn't quite sure that I understood the clause correctly, and I think maybe some clarity is required there, because the starting point is there should be no connection to the foul sewers of the water in this process. So that's part one. But then in terms of surface water sewers, I wasn't sort of completely 100% sure. So the starting point is that water from suds shouldn't be discharged back into the water course unless it has been fully cleaned by your suds management train. So this comes back to making sure that your suds is properly designed and it isn't just a pipe taking that otherwise dirty water and just then putting it somewhere at the end or putting it straight back into your surface water system. This, another one of the benefits of suds is it actually cleans up the water as part of this process. So I don't think that's an either yes or no or definitive answer, but I feel that it's an area that needs more investigation to actually find out what is being proposed.
Yeah, no, that's really useful to know.
Just to come in on that as well, the committee might be aware that DERA are introducing potential increased financial penalties under the Fisheries and Water Environment Bill. So we would like to see, what we wouldn't want to see is if this bill relates to financial penalties that are less than what the DERA one is proposing, there's a potential to undermine and almost permit for less financial penalties, water pollution incidents through either miscommunication or other incidents. Yeah,
that's useful as well, Robert. Thank you.
I think as well. Just in general, habitats are struggling from a range of different pressures, and water quality is one of those. So, if something could be strengthened here, to add to that jigsaw puzzle of things that we're hoping to get in place from a legislative point of view to help improve the outcomes of habitats and reduce the pressures, then we would be supportive of it.
We would like to think as a committee.
Just to reiterate, just to underline what John had said there. We know that wastewater infrastructure across the board is under enormous pressure. I'm sure we're all familiar with the issues. So although this is just one piece of the puzzle, any opportunity to sort of strengthen or alleviate some of the pressures that are that are ongoing in that system, we would be welcome.
Okay. Thank you. We'd like to think as a committee that both departments are talking to each other and they're not operating in a silo mentality. I'm sure that's not the case, but we will make sure that they're teased out so that there's to ensure overlap. But I think on Sharon's point as well, it'd be important to tease out to try and get exactly the purpose of that clause. I agree with you on that. Okay, I'll open up the members. I might come back to myself at some stage. Cahill, first of all.
Thanks very much, Sharon, and thank you very much for coming to the committee and your presentation. I just want to follow up on that, because that's an important one in terms of Clause 11 there, because if there's a wee bit of misunderstanding or how it relates, the chair's asked, we need ourselves more clarity in that, because I was going to raise that issue, but it's already raised. Just want to go back to the issue of clauses 2 to 5, and Brona, I'll come to you in a minute. I'll just throw it open here to the whole ladies. You see, in relation to, obviously we want to deliver something that's of the highest environmental standards. So my question is that what it says in clauses 2 to 5? That's one element of it. The other element you raised, Brona, in relation to changing the word from may to must. Now, we've done this in legislation before. Obviously, the jury may or may not be out on how that's all related, how that rolled out in the past. Just your views, really, on those two things. Are we providing enough within the clauses 2 to 5 in terms of SUDs and high environmental standards, and how we roll that out and how we consistently roll that out? And secondly, in relation to changing the actual wording of the legislation itself from may to must, just your views. I know you touched a wee bit on it, but just how important you feel that would be,
I was going to say, sorry. Well, I was going to just go back to the definition point, because, as I said, I think the points then that Brona will bring up will hang from that. So I think this point that the definition only talks about water quantity, so the amount and the flow of it, and misses the other 3 pillars of SUDS, effectively means that every other aspect, whether good or bad, within the rest of the legislation will struggle to deliver the biodiversity benefits, the amenity benefits and the water quality benefits, because they're not in the definition. Brona will have more to say, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, it was just, I was just going to go back to the point that Sharon had made there about that point about the definition, and that it's the definition as it's given is relatively one-dimensional. And as I tried to, I suppose, emphasize in the presentation, this is, or has the potential to be, much more multifaceted. There's so many other benefits that can be gleaned from the implementation of nature-based SUDs. And, as I kind of mentioned, it making those mandatory, trying to strengthen the bill so that those are the default rather than the exception, trying to really embed the use of nature-based solutions and the prioritization of nature-based solutions. I think that there's definitely scope for strengthening and making the bill more robust from that perspective. And then I'll go back to our overall point, which is that we view this bill as a really vital opportunity. Like this is a moment to make some, really decisive moves around water management and having more integrated water management going forward that will improve climate resilience, that will help us meet biodiversity targets as well as, our water quality targets that we have. So, I suppose my overall sense, and I think the view of the sector is that there is room for strengthening clauses 2 to 5, as you mentioned there. And happy to kind of go through any of them again, but yeah, the overall sense is that there is scope for strengthening and adding clarity.
Just to add on that, I suppose, that word must be seen kind of in context with the rest of the legislation. So Section 8 on EIAs, which is about making sure that any kind of SUDs or developments that are coming forward go through environmental impact assessment. So I think that's a really important element of that, because depending then how people interpret that, so you could go into development in an area of green space that's adjacent to a protected area or ancient woodland, and see the word must, and therefore they go ahead to kind of get the SUDs in and say, well, the legislation says we have to put the SUDs in at the expense then potentially of the protected area or the ancient woodland. So when I mention ancient woodland, that's trees that have been in and around in the landscape since the 1600s. And protected areas cover a range of different things. So I suppose looking at those developments and making those points mandatory needs to be seen in light of the rest of the legislation, so it's coherent. So must go in, but you need to do your EIA. If it's shown that it's going to have environmental impact on woodlands or other protected areas, then obviously they need to find a way to kind of do it that is kind of holistically environmentally sustainable, not just SUDs at all costs. That's not what we're saying. Yes, of course, prioritise it, but make sure that it is in line with the environmental impact assessment as well.
No, appreciate just a fine point. And that's why I asked the question in that context, to ensure we get it right, because which we know SUD's been around a long period of time, and John, you've been here for a few years presenting the committees and yourself, and the thing for me is we have used terminology like that before, but it's about being consistent and getting it right. So it's a small bill, it's 16 clauses, but I mean at the same time it's an important piece of legislation, and we marry it up correctly. And I do agree with the DERA point. We need to be working across the departments to ensure that marries up right, and it's not just okay, we've done this before, it's been out there and everything else. It's a piece of legislation coming through the Assembly. We're at committee stage, interrogating it now and collecting evidence, obviously. And I think some of the stuff mentioned today, I'm not arguing where some must or may, but we need to just get it right. Yeah. And we need to ensure the outworkings and the delivery of it all. That's the most important thing. But listen, thank you very much for your answers and your presentation.
Thank you, Cahill. Harry?
Thank you very much, Chair. You did mention Wales and that SUDs was not a new thing in the world. I was just thinking, I know you touched on it a bit, but in relation to long-term maintenance, adoption, and even down to design standards, what lessons could we learn from other parts of the UK or Ireland?
Again, so I'm not the expert myself, but speaking to my colleagues, they were saying that the new guidance that's recently been published in England on SUDs would actually be really helpful. And actually they feel that for the first time it has taken that step change between this pipe to a hole in the ground version of SUDs to something that actually delivers those wider benefits and something that's much more attractive within your development. I think the other area, and why maybe there's some pushback, is that while SUDs themselves as a concept have been around for a long time, and there are the sort of showcase places where it has been done, on the whole, the engineering, planning, and consenting sectors, whether the professionals in the local governments, etc., there aren't very many people who do have that knowledge and expertise. So how do we skill up people so that they're not afraid of this as a concept, which again is why the Belfast City Supplementary Planning Guidance is very interesting, because it does some of that myth busting. But as I say, being close to home, you've got a homegrown benefit. And my colleagues have worked with the people who produced that, and without necessarily giving them a plug per se, have sort of said, maybe the committee should be talking to these people, because these are the people who could help you do it on the ground.
Mm-hmm. The Institute of Civil Engineers have a good guidance document, and I'm sure they will be in at some stage if they haven't been in already, around kind of SUDs and the different management trains that you have to bring in. So there's lots of good examples there of where successful SUDs projects have delivered. Forest Research as well have a range of kind of case studies online. So one in particular, Malmö in Sweden, found that they brought in SUDs and they showed that it not just kind of had an impact on water quantity and quality in the area, but it also started to have an impact on the local area in terms of amenity, in terms of job provision, and in terms of value of the area in general. A lot of these SUD systems were set up to try and support 1 in 15-year flood events, so the likelihood of that flood happening only once in every 15 years. But it was shown to stand up to pretty good scrutiny on 1 in 50-year flood events. So the SUDS scheme went in the mid to late 90s, still operating today, and is surviving kind of 1 in 50-year type flood events, retaining 70% of the water as part of a holistic system. So there's a range of different kind of good examples everywhere, but I suppose, like all of these things, the frustration is let's get some good examples from Northern Ireland to make sure that these things are in place to show this proof of concept, and like we've said, legislation of course needs to be right, but this is something that's not new, and we need to kind of be getting on and kind of doing this as opposed to kind of looking at examples from elsewhere.
Just to come in on John's points, I've got one bad example and I've got 2 good examples. So the poor planning example is Downpatrick is built on historical saltmarsh, and it floods very, very frequently. There are examples of for good examples, you've got the WWT Castle Espy, which has that reed bed system to deal with the grey water that's coming off that goes directly into Strangford Lough. So they have to ensure that their water quality that's going into that protected area is of a very, very good standard. And then you've got the examples from the kind of marinas, so Belfast, Bangor, Glenarm, and now newly Carrickfergus, in terms of where the Ulster Wildlife have got their native oyster nurseries. So Bangor has been the most established since 2022 and has seen a marked improvement in terms of water quality in marinas kind of at the end of the pipeline. So, yeah.
Just a further point to make, I suppose, on lessons learnt from potentially from other jurisdictions. I suppose one thing that we've seen across the board is the importance of integrating SUDS plans early in the design process. So really emphasising that the importance of, from the very beginning of plans and developments, that SUDS are integrated at that stage. So we've seen from, and our evidence from other jurisdictions is that SUDS are often cost neutral compared to conventional drainage. They reduce the need for expensive downstream flood defences, as John has alluded to earlier. And then they obviously also significantly lower potential future public spending on flood damage and emergency response. So I suppose just to kind of maybe echo and support what John has said about the kind of urgency around these things, I think it is important to think about the continued cost of inaction on this stuff. This is a really it's a really important opportunity to get this stuff right, as we said. So so I suppose it's making sure that those decisions are made at the earliest possible opportunity.
Yep, okay. Thank you very much, Sharon, John, Robert, Brona. Excellent answers, especially the examples there, John. I think there'd be no better place to do good stuff in here, because we're such a wetlands, so if we could do it good here, we could be used as an example of how things could be done. So, yep, appreciate it.
Absolutely,
Thank you,
Harry.
Chair.
That's a good plug there, Harry.
Thank you, Harry. We'll move online to Militia. If you can hear us, Militia, you're up.
Good morning, Chair. agus Falker Overleg and Shahan Hughes are all very welcome here today. In fact, just leading on from Harry's question there as well, because I intend to ask him if we had any good examples here in the north of Ireland in relation to a SUDS programme that is actually meeting the 4 pillars. And if there is a good example, so too then I'm sure we probably have, just as the last speaker had mentioned there, poor examples as well. So I wonder that in addition to that, that within the legislation would it be possible that authority is given to either local authorities, NI Water or whoever, to revisit those bad examples or poor examples to ensure that they then would address the 4 pillars?
In terms of examples, other people around the table might have some. I don't have any specific ones for NI, but I'm sure there are ones out there. In terms of go back retrospectively and looking at old ones that aren't working well, I suppose this shows the importance of the legislation, because I suppose if like we've said, if we don't get these kind of projects right from the start and we don't integrate kind of that 4-pillared approach from the start and it leads to bad design, then it kind of impacts negatively on your proof of concept. And we have seen kind of examples in proof of concept of where this has worked elsewhere. So it'll be up to the local authorities and the legislation to decide whether they can go back retrospectively and potentially fix some of these things, and that'll be that will ultimately be a political and a funding decision. So where there is kind of bad examples of this and that these are kind of impacting kind of local communities negatively and it's not having a good biodiversity or environmental benefit, then there probably is rationale around looking at some of these old sites, but that'll be very much dependent on the legislation and funding that's available.
I think I would add.
I just wondered to what extent maybe that the poor examples exist, we'll say, currently. I get the impression from your presentations that much of what has been, or maybe there are more than desired examples of SUDS programs that were addressing purely the quantity of water as opposed to other pillars of that it should be addressing.
Well, I think that's probably a question on reading the legislation as it stands that we weren't 100% sure about. Does it only apply to new builds going forward, or is this about retrofitting this to existing developments? Now, whether they have no SUDS provision or have a poorly planned one, I don't know. So I think that would be something that it would be worth clarifying as part of the legislation as well. Again, because my colleagues have flagged with me that this has been an issue raised in England about both the mixture of the sort of not having them at all or the poorly designed previous versions of SUDS. And there's now quite a significant number of retrofit projects happening in England, which are costing millions of pounds in sort of many of the major cities. So these are priorities that are happening there already. I don't have them memorised, but I have access to some case studies that colleagues have produced that we could share with the committee afterwards if that would be valuable to you.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Just to add to that, it might be beneficial to look at the nature recovery networks and associated partnerships to see where amendments can be done retrospective to areas where we're seeing like kind of large scale flooding and kind of water quality issues. Yeah.
Okay. Happy enough, Militia, at this stage?
Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Good, Chair.
Move on to Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation thus far. It's been very comprehensive. Just again, just sort of circling back on some of the things that have already been said. Mr. Walsh, you mentioned there about where it's been done badly, if that makes sense. And I'm sort of, as I'm flicking through the legislation as well, you know, there's the section number 7, which is the flood assessment there, if that makes sense. I wonder, I mean, is that somewhere that could tie in to be elaborated on, or is that something where that you would think that sort of the legislation would need beefed up on, or is it, if not specifically section 7, just, you know, anywhere? And sorry, that's an open. It was just on what.
Yeah, I think there are ecosystem services and benefits that can be gained by widening the definition and meeting those other, the rest of the pillars to address the kind of flood risk, and where nature-based solutions can form a core part of the assessment and management in those areas. I think in terms of appropriate planning of where developments take place is a core part of that before anything starts moving forward. Yeah.
I think, Andrew, just in terms of read across to other bits and pieces of legislation, so this legislation mentions flood assessment, but the Floods Directive, as implemented as legislation in 2009, you know, should provide provisions for that flood assessment. So that's piece of legislation should already cover flood assessment, but I think it's important that you know, in any new SUD scheme, that there is an obvious kind of flood assessment before its development, because obviously, you know, you don't want it to kind of deliver a negative benefit where you're trying to implement something positive. So I suppose that comes into kind of that management training and design phase. But again, you know, that read across to those other bits and pieces of legislation are important here, so that there is coherence, you know, across the piece, and making sure that these things are going in and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
And if I can add, just to go back to John's previous point, that we shouldn't be looking at SUDs in isolation. It's part of a wider catchment and how we're managing those habitats and those areas beyond that. Now, I realise that's potentially beyond the scope of the legislation as drafted, but I think, you know, if there is anything that we can do to the legislation that can make it sort of, you know, consider that aspect, and those habitats outside your conurbation area that can help with flood management, etc. as well, and part of those processes. So we've mentioned peatland, we've mentioned wetlands, we've mentioned trees, but I think that's the thing, because it's quite small and targeted, we're only looking at a small piece of what the bigger picture needs if we're going to manage flooding properly.
Okay. Just something go back to Mr. Martin said, John, whenever you talked about the balance between encroaching, I think it was the 16 trees in the 1600 and stuff like that. Again, that sort of environmental impact assessment, I think that's it's addressed in section 8 there, so it is. I mean, again, is there any elaboration in there? Is there anything specifically in there that needs tidying up? Because again, it is something that you're, you know, I'd be conscious of, that yes, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater in this regard.
EIA is a fairly well proven kind of process for kind of development as they go forward, and you know, your EIA is as good as the ecologist or consultancy who you get to do it for you. So you know, it's fairly well proven in terms of being able to identify the different environmental challenges that might be impacted on as the development goes forward. So I think sometimes maybe when we are putting in kind of some of these developments that have an environmental benefit, you know, there is a thought maybe around, well, this is for an environmental purpose, so, you know, I don't need an EIA. But, you know, the EIA is kind of clearly laid out here as something that's required and something that's important. And it helps address some of the bits that we've all spoke towards there, kind of just that holistic approach. So, you know, we're talking about kind of improving areas for biodiversity, improving water quality, but actually looking across the piece, is there any specific species or habitats there that we haven't thought about? EIA is the process to kind of help you bring in that kind of holistic approach to impact, not just on the development, but the long-term impact of its development and maintenance. And also then it helps you kind of do the look across to other bits and pieces of relevant legislation and policy, because for a lot of these processes, you're wanting to kind of have multiple benefits. The EIA process essentially will help you kind of work those out. So yeah.
If I can add two things. So the first is Clause 8, as I've read it, as it's currently drafted, only really applies to sort of the engineering type aspects of it. And without the changes to that definition, it may not cover the natural benefits that we're talking about or the natural aspects of a SUDS development. So again, it comes back to a lot of this stuff hinges or hangs off how the definition is improved. And if it's not, we're not going to get those bigger benefits, and the EIA may not be required for a SUDS a fully blown SUDS development in that sense. So I think again that's we either solve that by improving the definition, or we would need to look at that EIA clause again. And then the other thing is I'm not clear is, does this only apply to the SUDS bit of any development? Because there will be an EIA for the development in itself. So are we duplicating or overlapping or potentially contradicting? So how do the various aspects of the EIA fit together? Now, I suspect in the real world, a developer would produce one EIA that would have different aspects or different chapters relating to different aspects of the development. But because the legislation is targeted, you're only looking at a small bit of the wider picture.
Andrew, for now. Okay, Justin.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, folks. Sharon, you mentioned the cooling effect of SUDS. I think your presentation, you've made SUDS cool. So, thank you very much.
Always cool, Justin.
It was very enjoyable.
This committee's always cool.
It was very enjoyable, and you're very over the details. So, thank you so much for your evidence. Quantity and volume. What's the standards from your perspective? Is it greenfield runoff? What is the actual quantity of runoff permissible from a site from your perspective?
So again, as I say, I'm not the expert, but what my colleagues have told me is that that there isn't actually anything to say in the legislation per se that says that runoff from a new development must not exceed the existing greenfield runoff, and that it needs to be designed to follow the existing flow routes across the site. So I am verbatim reading what I've been told rather than I have a specific knowledge myself. So I'm afraid I don't have much more information than that.
You don't have a view as to what it should be?
Well,
10,
just other than
it
shouldn't exceed the existing greenfield runoff.
You're happy with
limits.
that? Okay.
But it doesn't actually say in the legislation that there should be a cap on it. So that's potentially a gap in it.
Is that universal from your perspective? Should that be for a one-off development or a development with 500 units, or an industrial development site? Should that be?
I'm afraid I can take that away and ask that question to colleagues and feedback to the committee if that's helpful, if none of my other colleagues have anything else to say.
You obviously, biodiversity is a huge part of what you are proposing. Are you being species specific? Because biodiversity is a whole broad brush. Are you being species specific as to what the biodiversity wishes you would like to see on sites, as in obviously animals and planting?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is going to be case specific. I mean, John's mentioned in terms of the trees, making sure that your trees are appropriate for what you're trying to achieve in the site. So obviously we're not expecting somebody to recreate a peat bog in the middle of an urban area necessarily, but it's about what are the multiple benefits that you can get from it, and one would hope that would in what you're doing would also attract species. I mean, you can sometimes get what are considered relatively rare species in fairly sort of populated and urban areas, particularly if you're thinking about insects and some of the birds species and things like that. But it's it would be a case-by-case basis. I can see Brona, I don't know whether she wanted something to add. And
Just I suppose very quickly, just to go back on the importance of the EIA in that consideration. So your EIA will flag, where species-specific action is needed. So I suppose it probably would be rare enough that where there was something super specific for a protected species, that a SUDS program would go in to try and remedy it. Because it would be likely that habitat would be protected specifically for that species, and therefore would have a management plan associated with that species to help with its conservation. But the EIA process would help you earmark something where species-specific action is required, or there were specific species nearby that could potentially benefit from a certain SUDS scheme. Probably, like Sharon said, that would be on a case-by-case basis, and that's why the importance of the EIA embedded in this process would help determine what sort of action is required.
Obviously, you can have an EIA for a one-off housing development, so it's also scale related. In terms of the trees, which obviously you're over, John, would you have mandated indigenous trees position?
Absolutely, yep. Everything in grown in Northern Ireland that we use is Irish sourced and grown. So we get all of our trees provenance from Ireland. That would be our expectation. That's everything's UK and ISG, Irish sourced and grown.
Maintenance. There's this view probably in housing development that everything needs to be lawn. Surely there can be some design where it's wildflower beds as opposed to where you're self-maintaining.
Yep.
Is that something you would be?
Yeah, well, on a case-by-case basis, absolutely. Each SUD scheme should be designed to deliver for those holistic benefits, and I guess the local authorities who are potentially adopting these schemes, it costs money obviously to maintain these sites, so they'll, in that design phase, they'll be looking to see, where can we improve on maintenance, where we're putting in natural solutions that will naturally maintain themselves. But for all of these schemes, there comes a level of risk and a level of maintenance, and the complexity of them requires a certain amount of maintenance. None of these schemes are maintenance free, so it's important to flag that. But I'm sure in the design phase they'll be able to kind of pinpoint different points that have less maintenance than others.
And quick last question, Chair. What's your view on attenuation ponds?
Sorry, what?
What's your view on attenuation ponds?
Depends, I guess, on what outcome you're trying to produce. So if these ponds are for offline flood storage or for water quality, it depends on a case-by-case basis, I guess, where they are going to be implemented. But they are, I guess, they're an important part of the toolbox for SUDs. So the developer and whoever is implementing the SUDs will have a range of different options available to them, and sometimes that might be one of them.
Folks,
I think a point. Sorry, can I could just come in on that one? Sorry. I think that actually a point to make about quite a lot of the questions that you have is on, going back to what Sharon and John have said, is that it's very much on a case by case and a site specific basis. So it's important to have a toolbox of different kind of mechanisms and SUDs available that could be deployed in the appropriate area. And I think that this links back to one of the points that we make about how it's absolutely critical that guidance on the design and maintenance standards of SUDs is absolutely essential. So that must be it must be a requirement that is produced by the department, because that will help to inform how these decisions are made going forward, because there are so many, as we've kind of talked about there are so many different considerations around biodiversity, around climate targets, and around what is the specific tool that should be deployed in a particular place, taking into account that wider holistic catchment level appreciation of environmental risks and benefits. So I think it really does underline the important role that clear guidance would play in this context.
I'd just like to thank you once again. I think it's a very, very important evidence session and certainly informed my view of the bill. So thank you all. Thank you very much.
Justin, I think we'll echo that. Absolutely. Thanks, Justin. And back to Cahill.
Thanks, Chair. Just a wee point was raised, and it's an important one that Andrew had raised about the flood risk, and he tried to tie it into one of the clauses. I mean, and John, you'd answer, because we had PPS 15 was the old flood one. This is all tied up in the SPPS now. I just wanted to ask a question, because Sharon, you were talking there about Belfast City Council and the SPPS. I take it that's what you were saying. So my question really is, see, there's other policies out there and we should be adhering to them. And I mentioned this in the context of, whilst we're bringing this piece of legislation forward ourselves, area plans are going to play a big part in all of this here. And people should know this is an add-on on what we're trying to do specifically with this bill today, but ultimately going forward in the future, you know, there's no, I'll use this example, there's no point in an area plan going, we're going to build 1,500 units or 1,000 units over the next 12 months or whatever, without looking right across the board how this impacts the introduction of this, plus also the old policies there already, the floodplains and everything else. So just in your view, I mean, clearly some of those conversations have been taking place, or maybe it's haven't, because you've been big organisations, been part of the system for a number of years. Those conversations, just when you mentioned Belfast, they seem to be ahead of it in terms of some of the ideas already. Have you had any conversation with this? That, because I think it's a key element too. But today is about this policy, this piece of legislation. There's other conversations should be ongoing out there as to how to develop in the future, as well as the retro stuff and all that people have mentioned. Just a wee question.
Yeah, I can't kind of comment for the whole sector, and I think probably those conversations aren't happening maybe as much as they need to. But I suppose the framework and the architecture around the climate action plans and adaptation plans provides a route map for having those conversations. So what they tend to do is kind of look at that stepping stone approach, where we have up until 2027 for this kind of current climate action plan, and up to 2032 for the next one, all the way up to 2050. So, you know, we do have architecture there that helps society have these conversations in a way that you deliver kind of policy coherence that delivers for both climate adaptation and flood risk management. So yes, those conversations need to be had more. I think probably at, you know, I can't comment on council level, but you know, I know that is kind of occupying the minds of local authorities, as well as we are seeing more of these flood events. We've had our wettest January in 149 years, you know, so and a lot of the climate predictions are that this future that we're experiencing now is here to stay to a certain extent. So we need to be having those conversations, which are not just, you know, within the political cycles, but beyond.
I appreciate it, and thanks for answering, because I know it's a wee bit left field, but it's something that's coming at us, and you know what I mean. So.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I think, you know, it's at the planning stage where this bigger picture can be taken into consideration, and the nature-based solutions elsewhere in the catchment and the SUDs should be brought in at this early stage. And I think Brona mentioned earlier, it's not something that you should bring in the end, it's something you should be bringing in at the beginning. That's not restricted to the project, that should be built in at the planning stage. And also, as my colleagues have said, it's this reading across the range of policy objectives that we're trying to achieve, and how will this contribute to it rather than maybe contradict it.
Thank you.
Okay,
thanks, sir. No wee bit left field.
Has anyone else got anything at this stage? Okay, can I just, on behalf of the committee, thank you for your time today. You've been very generous to Brona, Sharon, John, Robert. We really appreciate both the written evidence and the answers to the questions today. I personally, and I know other members as well, have found this really beneficial. I have no doubt we will remain engaged as the scrutiny of this bill goes forward and as we look to make amendments, and I no doubt you'll be very happy to come back to us regarding that. So again, thank you for your time today, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, members, really good session. Can I seek agreement to write to the organisations to ask them for written responses to any of the questions that have been raised today? The clerk, as usual, has been scribbling frantically. There is quite a lot that's come out of that, probably one of our best evidence sessions yet, I find. Members content with that?
The clerk's brief that was sent to members in the pack.
Yes, there's questions in the clerk's brief that were sent to you. Are you happy with those to be sent on?
Great.
Yes. Okay. Anything arising out of that, Michael, that you want to discuss at this stage?
No, just that the RSPB rep said that she would send certain bits of information to the committee, but we'll write to them as a matter of course, as she had offered the information to the committee. That's the usual, usual standard.
The one thing
if the committee's content to do so.
The one thing that came out of that, and that continues to come out, is the ambiguity, and I think the need to shore up this idea of the guidance and the maintenance aspect of it. It continues to be flagged up as being one of the potential weakest points in the whole bill if it's not properly laid down. So I think we probably would want to dive into that, Andrew.
I think in the evidence session as well, they proposed their own hybrid models, and it would be good to sort of actually just if those are possible as much as anything else, you know what I mean? Because
yeah, we can certainly look into that. Maybe speak to the department again how they think that might be looked at. Okay, members, I'm going to propose a 5-minute comfort break before we bring in Mobile UK. If everyone's content, we'll adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes and see you back here just after past.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Okay, folks, welcome back. So we're moving on to item 8 on the agenda now, which is addressing planning barriers to telecommunications investment in Northern Ireland. We have representatives from Mobile UK and Mobile Infrastructure Forum who will present oral evidence. Nick, good to see you. Gentlemen, you're very welcome to the committee. So we have a couple of members out at the moment, but they will be returning shortly. So I'm just keen to welcome Gareth Elliott, representative of Mobile UK, Tom Sheppherd, representative of Mobile UK, Nick Speed, representative of Mobile UK, Will Osborne, representative of the Mobile Infrastructure Forum, and Sean McHenry, representative of the Mobile Infrastructure Forum. Gentlemen, you're very welcome. Thank you for your patience today. We had a good evidence session prior to that. I'm sure we'll have another good one today. Normal process of businesses will give you 5 to 10 minutes, however you want to split that up between yourselves, and then we'll open up to the committee members for questions, and we'll take it from there. So over to yourselves. Whoever wants to lead off.
I'm happy to lead.
Yeah,
firstly, thank you for having us here today. I think it's quite an important topic we're on mobile connectivity. Just to flag, you do have representatives here from Mobile UK in terms of the operators. In the room we have BTE and Vodafone 3. Virgin Media O2 had wanted to be here, but we obviously are restricted in terms of the numbers that can be here. And on the Mobile Infrastructure Forum, we have MBNL and Cornerstone represented. There are 2 others within that as well, which is the Wireless Infrastructure Group and Cellnex. We're here today really just to talk about the rollout of mobile infrastructure across Northern Ireland and the barriers that we see inherent in that. And I think just to start, one of the concerns we have is that essentially the investment that is happening across the industry, and it is significant at the moment. We've recently had a merger of Vodafone 3, which is bringing £11 billion commitment up to 2030. Have a mobile transformation plan with Virgin Media O2, which is £700 million annually. And EE are expanding to 5G SA to 99% of the population. So there's significant investment going in, and that investment will go where it's less friction in its first instance. And one of the things we are concerned about is the planning system in Northern Ireland is adding significant friction in terms of our ability to deploy that quickly. We live in a world where mobile is no longer a luxury. It's very much part of our everyday lives. We need it for accessing our bank accounts. We need it for GP consultations through mobile apps. If you see ambulances and blue lights going around, they are connected via mobile signals. It is a point, for instance, one thing that was raised to me the other day, 95% of jobs are now only available online. In a world of digital inclusion, we sit in a world where 25% of people now only access the internet through their mobile phone. As part of a sort of cost of living crisis and COVID, where people choose one or the other between broadband or mobile, if they can't have both, they tend to then sit with mobile. So digital inclusion is now a big point to raise, and equally the level of importance of mobile connectivity among that. The issues we raise over here, and we'll go into these in more detail, is we have decision timelines taking way beyond 12 months and in some cases 5 years. That has impacted on rollouts of things like the shared rural network, where investment that should have been and was earmarked for Ireland could not be built here because we could not get it through the planning system. We're talking millions of pounds of inward investment that has not been Policy stagnation, we have guidance, which is woefully out of date. DCAM 14, which is the advice notice, was implemented in 2008. That is essentially when 3G was being involved. We're now in 4G, 5G and 5G standalone, and we're looking beyond that already. We have fragmented leadership in terms of we are looking for leadership on this in terms of how to take this forward. Planning legislation is now out of kilter with many other nations and the Republic of Ireland. And while we have had positive noises coming from the Department for Infrastructure and a desire to work with us, we still are looking for actual frameworks and vehicles to do that, and timeframes as well. So I'll leave it there from my point of view and allow Sean to quickly jump in. But I think where we are is, while there is some positives, we are very much out of kilter with both the UK nations and the Republic of Ireland in terms of our ability to do this as quickly as we would like. Okay.
Thanks, Gareth. Nice to see everybody. I'm a chartered town planner, and I'm actually from the North Coast, but I've got a UK-wide remit, so I've got good visibility of how the other jurisdictions, other local authorities around the country handle things like this. I suppose one of the reasons why I'm probably here today is I can talk really to the practicalities of this situation and what it means. Getting into the detail of it, Northern Ireland is the only part of the UK that doesn't have a prior approval system. That particular system is really, really beneficial in what we do, in that it establishes the principle of development, and perhaps, most importantly, it attaches a statutory 56-day determination deadline. That then, in real terms, sees the vast majority of the infrastructure that we would look to deploy in England, Scotland or Wales going through the planning system in roughly around 8 weeks. Sometimes we extend it to kind of help address issues. So it might go from 2 months to 3 months. Compared that to some of the applications that we have here that are in the planning system for a year, 18 months, even longer. We recently had a case in Armagh where we submitted an application at a telephone exchange, so kind of somewhere where you would think this would be a relatively acceptable kind of proposal, beside a PSNI mast, and it had been in the planning system for 3 years before it went to planning committee. The planning committee actually refused that, which I personally feel as a planning consultant that wasn't a good decision, and we're going to appeal that. But that appeal now could probably take between a year or 2 years, and so actually something that we probably would have got through in another jurisdiction in 2 to 3 months is going to take 3, 4, potentially 5 years here. And with the sort of investment that Gareth is talking about, that will be an absolutely massive blocker to the deployment of the infrastructure. I kind of mentioned there as well that a prior approval system would have made that go faster. The fact that it was refused, I actually almost have a little bit of pity for the officers and the committee members at the planning committee who did refuse that, because, as I say, I felt it was a bad decision, but they can only make decisions based on the material planning guidance and policy that is in front of them. And if that policy and that guidance is completely out of date for the modern infrastructure that we need, things need to be bigger now for ICNIRP reasons. We're using different spectrum. That directly influences the siting and design. So they're basing their assessment based on guidance that was built for a network in 2008, not a network in 2026. In terms of the policy element and the weight that a decision maker attaches on benefits versus harm, they're basing that on the SPPS, which was written back in 2015, but really only, in my view, amalgamated the previous planning policy statements that we had without properly updating them. Society's dependence and need for connectivity and how it's used and the benefits and the various applications that now come with it that didn't come whenever that policy was written, it's chalk and cheese. And so our view is that the SPPS, the telecoms element of that, needs to be updated to reflect society's dependence, the new benefits, the social and economic importance of connectivity that we now have that we didn't have then. So, I suppose just to summarise, I feel that we need real leadership and ownership, looking at permitted development legislation, planning guidance, looking at those more technical elements, and then the policy so that the appropriate weight can be put on all of the relevant material considerations in a decision-making process. In my view, Northern Ireland is already miles behind the curve compared to the other UK jurisdictions. And at the moment, for example, England are consulting on further updates to their permitted development legislation, further updates to the MPPF, and as part of the permitted development consultation, they've asked the question about updating their guidance as well, and they done that only a matter of years ago. So those other jurisdictions are going further and further ahead, and there are other conversations happening with Welsh Government as well, which may see them moving as well. So Northern Ireland are already behind, and they're going to get much further behind if there isn't real, tangible ownership driving these kind of changes that I've suggested.
Anyone from Mobile UK want to say anything at this stage before we go into questions? Or
thanks, committee. It's great to be here today. I'm Nick Speed from BTEE Group, and I'd just like to. It's great to be here. We had a conversation with your committee chair about these issues, and it's thank you for the opportunity for us to outline some of the concerns today that we are represented by Mobile UK in talking about. Just would like to give you a couple of practical examples of the challenges that the people who are building and maintaining our networks face. We've been making big investments in our networks, as Gareth mentioned. We have a stated ambition to get 5G plus to 99% of the population by 2030, and that obviously requires significant investment. I'm going to talk a little bit about the practical challenges that we face in the planning applications, but also in the modernisation of our sites, because in most of the examples that we're talking about here, we'll want to upgrade current sites and current masts so that they can actually deliver 5G plus. So I spoke to the people that build and maintain our networks ahead of coming to see you today. They do report that we currently do face challenges in terms of the length of time that applications take compared with other parts of the country. And a couple of recent examples in Belfast Harbour, where we were looking to build new sites so that we could support the development of the driverless vehicles in the harbour and the harbour's ambitions to be a leader in terms of smart logistics. Two applications that we needed there. One took 8.5 months and another took 10.5 months. So my colleagues are concerned that if we've got new applications coming forward, that they are going to be dealing with lengthy timescales there. What does that mean for us? Our ambitions are to make sure that we are the best network in the UK, and that means that we do set targets for ourselves. So we set this 99% target of getting 5G standalone to everywhere by 2030. If we set that target, it just means that we know that it's going to take us a lot longer to do the work here to be able to deliver against that target. So we have to build into our ambitions the fact that we know it is going to take longer for us to achieve that goal and aim here, because we want to make sure that our customers are served well everywhere. Just a little bit more, I think, on the challenges that the people talked about in terms of modernising the sites. And we've got 70 sites currently in Northern Ireland that we would like to be able to modernise, and we will be looking to modernise those. But we do find that there's a problem for us in that many of the sites that we're looking to upgrade, they're already at capacity. They've already got so much kit on them from our network and other networks that it's just going to be very difficult. So those masts are actually at capacity in terms of what they can deliver. So that does mean that we will need to be looking at other sites across the industry to be able to deliver the increased capacity that is being required to serve our customers. And so really this needs a coordinated approach so that we can start to look at other sites. In other parts, in other areas, we find that we're able to work with public organisations, the public sector, to be able to locate sites and masts on some of their properties. So a joined up approach here would enable us to do that rather than keeping on relying on the same people and the same infrastructure to just load more kit onto it. So that's a challenge for us. And I think the other thing that I would just add into the conversation today is that I think it is a really timely conversation to be having. Yesterday, the UK government, DSIT, announced a mobile market review. And this is something that at BT Group we've been calling for some time. This is a way for us to look at how do we get the investment that is needed to allow the UK to compete with other countries in Europe in having the mobile network that will give us world-class mobile network connectivity, and it's really important to the economy, not just in terms of some of the things that we want to do to take forward new opportunities in advanced manufacturing, creative industries, but also supporting transport, improving productivity when people are on trains and on roads, when increasingly people want to be connected while they're mobile. And so all of these things are really going to rest on whether we can unlock the investment that we know is there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. Anybody else at this stage, or happy to go questions?
I'll just jump in there if that's okay. Yeah, thanks, committee. Tom from Vodafone 3. As Gareth mentioned, we went through our formal merger process, which took over a couple of years, and formally signed that in June last year. Since that, we've had some public figures in terms of how much we're going to invest, £11 billion. That is fully regulated. So we have to hit those targets. We have milestones every year that we have to report to Ofcom and CMA in terms of how many sites we upgrade, how many more people we've been covering with 5G standalone and 4G as well. And if we do not hit those milestones, as the first check-in, as we call it, is April 2028, and if we do not hit our regulated targets, we are subject to 10% turnover fines. So we have to do this. And what that kind of means is we're really on a time pressure, and we're on a time pressure that started in June. And we've already delivered lots of upgrades already across Northern Ireland, but that's upgrades to existing infrastructure that didn't require full planning applications. And what we're seeing is over 45% of what we will have to upgrade will have to go through full planning. And what that means is, as Nick kind of mentioned, we will go to places that there's less friction for us to deliver because we have to do it, otherwise we're subject to the fine. So just a little bit of context in terms of where Vodafone 3 are in Northern Ireland, and where we sort of see we want to build in these areas. We want to deliver the network that people in Northern Ireland deserve, but we just need a little bit of help and guidance from the department.
Thanks, Tom. Okay. Oh, sorry, Will, do you know briefly?
Thank you very much, and again, thank you for the opportunity. My name's Will Osborne. I'm from MBNL, and we're a joint venture owned by EE&3. The mobile industry can be a little bit confusing with the different companies, mergers, and names of different companies. And I appreciate that can bring some confusion. However, we're representing all the major mobile operators and the infrastructure providers and the industry bodies representing us. What we've set out so far is the fact that there's an opportunity for Northern Ireland at the moment, an opportunity which is Northern Ireland for over the last 15 to 20 years has missed out on for various reasons. Technology hasn't, though, and it hasn't stood still. We're upgrading all of our base stations. We're having to deploy further new sites. 5G and 5G standalone is being rolled out more and more. The expectation is that connectivity is going to be ubiquitous everywhere. And there's now this opportunity to actually change things in Northern Ireland to make sure that we can actually roll this out quicker, easier, simpler, with less cost, and with a certain certainty of deployment as well. We've mentioned the timelines that we've got to meet, and they're quite critical, but it's really important that we can work with you to see whether we can achieve that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, if you're happy enough, we'll take questions and move to myself and then on to other members. So, look, you said at the start, I think, Gareth, the infrastructure aspects of mobile phone cannot be overstated. The general public, our constituents, expect it to be like running water. It has to be there all the time, and it has to be at its fullest possible capacity and coverage. And I want to dive into some of the issues you're facing as an industry. Before I do that, I think it's quite difficult not to be parochial about these things. Certainly last year I put up a post on social media just asking people for their feedback. I did feed that back directly to the providers individually, but some of the words were probably expletive deletive in terms of the coverage that was there. I'll not use them in open session today, but you can be aware of that. And these aren't people looking 5G, they're looking a bar, and they're looking 3 and 4G. And could I just maybe get feedback from yourselves as to how it can be with the amount of capacity we do have, and in areas where it says it's at 99% coverage for 4G and for phones calls, that quite often there's 0 or 1 bar. So I take Carrickfergus, Green Island, Ballycarry, Island McGee, I could go on in my constituency, massive black spots, yet when the people go on to the website it says they've got full coverage. And unfortunately they're not coming to you because they find it difficult to get in touch, so they come to me. And hence why I'm raising it today. So I have fed that through, and on a couple of examples that, to be fair to yourselves, have come back and articulated the reasons why and what investment's going to be there. Is it down to lack of investment in the infrastructure that's there, or do you need more and more people to flag up where they're not getting it? Because I can't understand how in 2026 there are key urban areas that just have massive black spots, and they are seemingly growing rather than becoming lesser. Is that a fair?
Well, if I could take that, I think you're saying is there a lack of investment. I think if I could flip that back, we are trying to invest. And we are looking to do that more.
Appreciate that, Gareth. I would just say though, it says on the website 99.9% coverage, and these people are telling me they can't get a bar, so they're being sold something.
I understand that, but part of that equally is what we've got here, which is we're looking at upgrades now. We're looking to add capacity into the system. So where there is coverage, and you may be having trouble because the capacity isn't what it needs to be, that is why a big part, well, essentially the element of where we're going now is upgrading the existing network. So I'll just give you one example. We are feeding into the permitted development right consultation in England at the moment. It's around 50 pages. A lot of that is about upgrades and making sure we can add capacity. So we do understand that, and we are aware. But as I say, we are sitting here. On the shared rural network, there is we looked roughly as a figure of nearly £30 million odd that would have gone here for actual physical infrastructure. That because we could not get through the planning system and the deadlines that we had to put that, is now elsewhere. That would have been now up and ready, and you would be experiencing the benefits of that. Again, the planning system meant that was what to happen. So I think in terms of, is there a lack of investment? We are here today to try and say, look, we have this investment. We want to put this in. We want to put it in quickly. We've talked about the legal requirements on as part of the merger. What we need to do is get the barriers out of the way so we can improve those services and provide that capacity and coverage that your constituents want. But we need to get that friction out of the way. And that is where we are. We are at an inflection point here, where, as I said, I really would love to show that this is an opportunity as well, because if we can take that opportunity, Northern Ireland can not only upgrade its planning, but in some ways improve that planning a bit beyond what we have elsewhere. But we are having this conversation. We have a strategy in every other nation of the UK. We have the mobile market review, which has just been released in England as well. We don't have a strategy here. The mobile action plan, which was the closest we have to a strategy, is coming to an end. what we don't understand is what is happening after that. We are saying we want to ensure that these discussions that we're having with the departments continue, and we want to ensure that they are formalised and there are timeframes with it as well. So I do, and I sympathise with what you hear from constituents, but equally we're coming today to say we want to improve that. We want to invest in Northern Ireland. But please help us in terms of those barriers that exist.
Look, Gareth, absolutely. As a committee, we'll not be found wanting in helping you to make that voice and to articulate the message that's under the committee to the department to ensure as much streamlining can be done to assist with as much investment in infrastructure as possible. I'm just, I suppose, at this stage articulating the 600 or 700 messages and comments that I got whenever I put it out there to not people living in the middle of nowhere, but people who do expect at the very least a basic level of coverage in areas where they're being told by the providers when they pay for their bills that it's currently at 99.9% and that they're not in a black area. So I suppose my question is, how does that happen? And then we can move on to helping you articulate.
Yeah.
Sorry, do you want me to?
Part of the issue you're just describing is people are thinking, and historically this would have been the right thing to do, of the mobile infrastructure putting out coverage, right? So you're specifically referencing your urban areas where you've got high density of devices, high density of people. There is coverage there, but with the new applications, which are really, really data hungry, and the more and more devices, not just phones but sensors, etc. Some people have 2 phones, etc. Capacity is now becoming a bigger issue for us than coverage. So the signal takers are saying, yeah, there is coverage, but they don't give the full picture of capacity. And the very, very simplest way to think about that is if you've got a water pipe, for example, there's only a certain amount of water can go through that pipe before it starts backing up. And our networks are exactly the same. And what we're trying to do is, especially in our urban areas, Newry, Belfast, etc., is we need to build more sites. We need to upgrade the existing sites that are there already. And we need to build additional infrastructure to try and build the capacity into the network where there is already coverage. So there's a differential between those two things, and that's why you're going to see situations where you've got urban areas that has coverage, but it's like whenever you go to a football stadium, you're going to have coverage, but during half time you try to do something that will buffer and buffer and buffer. The coverage is there, but the capacity isn't, and that has become a problem for everyday life for people in urban areas. What we want to do is build sites. The problem is that we as Gareth said, we struggle to get that through the planning system in reasonable timescales. I'll give another example as well, is that you've probably seen it all over the news in the summer. Various arson attacks around Belfast, West Belfast, burning down sites. That caused huge uproar from people who had come to depend on that network. Taxi firms, the hospital couldn't get in contact with people who were on call, and some local politicians obviously reached out, pointing out the exact same issues that you refer, because these sites had gone down. And we were feeding back to them and saying, listen, we want to reinstate those sites as quickly as we possibly can to get those services up to your constituents, but some of those sites were so badly damaged we couldn't just reinstate them. We had to find a whole replacement site, and I had to explain to them, to get that replacement site through the planning process, those constituents could go without service for maybe 18 months to 2 years because of the barriers that we are facing, not because we are being slow at implementing that. And the same applies to your situation. So now, thankfully, in that particular case, those local politicians got us in front of Belfast City Council. We were able to have good conversations with planning departments, estates departments, and that has started to move things a little bit forward. But it still needs that overarching planning policy, legislation and guidance, from a DFI level.
Absolutely. Can I come back to the point then? I think it was yourself, Sharon, or Gareth made then regarding the prior approval system. What engagement have you had with the department on this to date regarding formulating that centralised planning policy? And in terms of the 11 councils, you talked about the flexibility that Belfast were able to show with elected reps getting on board. Other council areas out of the 11 that you think are working as well as they possibly can under the current in the current guidance, and others that are maybe lagging behind? Do we have a postcode lottery in terms of approach to this?
No, to be honest, you have to remember that any council can only make planning determinations based on the policy that's in front of them and the guidance in front of them. If they deviate from that, then they leave themselves open to judicial review and stuff like that, which they're not going to do. So, the councils can only do so much. Whenever I said Belfast are being lenient, I mean that's not the case. We still have plenty of situations in Belfast, and like Nick said, where things are going slow, but we need the guidance updated. In terms of the prior approval process, we obviously have had discussions with civil servants at the DFI. There does seem to be a willingness and an openness to bring that forward. It's just that, in my personal view, I think it needs ownership and it's really driven through now to progress that. There has been pushback on it in the past, but that's something we want to address and going forward. In terms of the timescales as well, I will admit that it's not all the council's fault. In some cases, the statutory consultees, NIEA, etc., they appear to be under-resourced. That a council can't issue a decision until they get those responses back from the statutory consultees, and if those statutory consultees are taking months and months and months, then they can't issue their decision, and there's a knock-on effect. So it needs looked at in that context as well.
Absolutely. If I can just add to that. I think the key element here is length of time to have these discussions. We've had a mobile action plan that's existed for 3 years, and within that, it's been difficult to get that engagement. It was essentially once those master tax happened, the ministers did engage with us, and that was a very fruitful discussion, and hopefully the discussions from that will relate in these discussions with the department. But again, on that leadership point, why does it take so long over here? You have the Department for Economy, which is the lead on telecoms. You have the Department for Infrastructure, which is planning. We have the Department for Communities, which is local. We have the Department of Finance, which is the public asset. Yet it is a reserve matter as part of DSIT. We're told that it can't always be discussed because it's a reserve matter. Yet we have projects like Project Stratum. That is a telecoms-led thing which happened very well, and the fixed element of broadband over here is fantastic. So it's clearly it can happen. And what we're asking is the same from a mobile perspective. We saw the programme for government come out, and there is not any element of digital infrastructure in that. So I think, that's length of time in time to getting these discussions and moving things forward. We are very welcome that we've got that now, but we haven't got any time frame. We haven't got any vehicle to take those discussions forward. We understand it's going to happen, which is fantastic. And then if we look at our planning approval rates, one thing that has come back is your planning approvals are quite high. Yes, but it's the length of time they take. If you have a planning process that takes upwards of 2 to 3 years, in that time you do not have that capacity and coverage that we've been talking about. You've talked about your residents and where they are. Often there will be a planning application that is waiting, and yet that could be rectified, but we just cannot get it through the system. And when we get to that final decision, if that's a rejection, we've got to go back in for another 2-3 years before we can get that decision. So again, while approval rates might be positive, it is the length of time on both having that discussion, getting that strategy through, and then having the legislation change. As I say, we are at a time where we are seeing all nations across the UK really looking at this now and putting this into strategy. We have a 5G strategy in Scotland, we have a mobile action plan in Wales, and we have the mobile market review that's just been published in England. We did have a mobile action plan over here, but that is now being wound down. So again, it's what is next, and we're keen to understand that.
And look, just before I bring you in, we hear it time and time again, one of the biggest frustrations for investment in Northern Ireland is how complex and how slow the planning process is. It isn't fit for purpose, in my opinion. The times it takes for statutory consultees to come back, delaying process, it's just not fit for purpose. And you're talking about £30+ million worth of investment. Our constituents are affected as a result because of the lack of investment when it comes to coverage, so we totally get it. I suppose, is there any merit, given the complexity of who has remit for it outside of planning, is there any merit in a cross-departmental, including UK government working group that could be tasked with a very short, sharp piece on this with input from yourself to try and deliver what is needed across, because there's a multitude of people having to have a role here. Clearly it's not working currently. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I think I would like to take the positive in that we have, we have been told that the Department for Infrastructure wants to engage with the industry on a bilateral level to discuss this. We have proposals that have been put forward and we've responded to on the basis of potential permitted development reforms. I think what we're asking now is what, when and how. And I think, if that is a wider discussion, we're happy to have that. We stand ready, and we're here today because we want to have those discussions. We want to move things forward. We are at a pivotal moment in industry investment and rollout. We are, as I say, we've got 5G and 5G standalone deployment that's happening. We have a 2G and 3G switch off, which is essentially retiring those legacy technologies and improving them and upgrading them to 4G and 5G. That all is critical investment, and as I say, we talk about whether they're investment or not. We're saying that there is investment, and we want to get that out, and we want Northern Ireland to benefit from that too.
Certainly, before I bring Nick in, one of the commitments I'll certainly propose on the back of this meeting today is to write to the department and ask when that engagement's going to happen, because I think that is essential. It's lamentable that it's taken this long, given how pressing and important this investment is for Northern Ireland from a digital comms point of view. So we will be asking that question on your behalf, and I know that you'll be continuing to lobby from your end. And Nick, did you want to come in before?
Yes, Deputy Chair. Just would like to sort of take it back a bit to the constituent experience that you relayed, because we share your frustrations when people are finding that the networks aren't serving them in the way that they should be doing. It's just, I think that this, for me, the investment that we're talking about today is obviously designed to try and reduce the number of points when there could be those frustrations of your constituents. So just a couple of examples. So, and because I think everyone also wants to sort of be mindful of not just like building infrastructure for the sake of building infrastructure, but the way that technology is moving on can actually help us address some of that situations if we have the right environment to be able to make the investment. So a couple of examples. So we were, in the autumn last year, we started to deploy for the first time anywhere over any network, started to deploy technologies that mean that if one mast is down, the neighbouring mast can actually, if there's spare capacity, can actually then provide the capacity to that area. So technology that allows pairing and sharing of masts. So that will be coming to Northern Ireland in the spring, later in the year. And so that is a way to sort of make sure that we're managing the infrastructure better, and if there is a failure on a mast for whatever reasons, you've got that sort of built in. We're also wanting to put on more and more of our masts power generators, so that if there's a power failure, which can be one of the reasons why some of your constituents can experience loss of service, we want to put more. So we've got a massive programme of increasing the number of our masts where we've got generators actually at the mast that can kick in as soon as there's a power cut. We realise how important all of this is and how frustrating it is when things go wrong. And I think there's several of you around the table that have contacted me when things have gone wrong, and said it's important that we have the mechanisms in place to be able to identify, what is a failure when it happens.
Yeah. And I think equally it's important that our constituents feed it through to us and to you, so that you're aware of where that investment needs to take place. Before we move to other members, might be Sharon or Gareth that answers this question. Can you spell out for us, in an ideal world, how quickly could we have what you want to roll out rolled out if we had the planning process in place and the everything in place, versus where we stand today and how long it's going to take for the investment that you want to see in Northern Ireland? Is that possible to spell out?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. What I could do is kind of give you a rough comparison in terms of one individual site, and then you can quantify that by the number of sites that we would have, which is in the hundreds, if not thousands, across all the various operators. But I genuinely can get applications through. Well, actually, you know what? There are some proposals actually in terms of upgrade in GB where I don't even need an application for prior approval. That will be straight permitted development. Wouldn't even need to go near a planning authority other than a notification to let them know that we're doing it. That's a notification, you're not asking for permission. Here, and I can just go straight to build after 28 days. Here I have to, in a lot of those cases, go through that full planning process, which is taking almost a year. So part of our ask isn't just actually bringing in the prior approval system, it's actually reducing restriction to the point where some of this stuff is just straight permitted development. There's no need for any application, and it's so minor. Now that also is the benefit of meaning we can roll out significantly quicker, more cost effective, more efficient, but it is the additional benefit of your councils who are already kind of under-resourced and under pressure. It removes a huge volume of applications from their desks that probably inevitably would have been approved anyway, freeing up resource for them to spend time on other proposals, wind farms, housing, etc., etc. So yeah, there are certain sites I can get through in 28 days. Here they could take a year. Similarly, if it's under the prior approval system for a new site, that would be 56 days. Again, here, at least a year. Another thing about it is, the planning is just at the front end of it, and if the planning element is slowed up, then the next stage, i.e. like conversations with landowners, some landowner negotiations can take months and months and months. We can't even start doing that until the planning piece is already done. Then you have to go and apply to get it connected into electricity. That takes time. And so there are various elements around here which are depending on the planning system, and without the planning, being done quickly, it slows down the whole thing. So the difference really could be literally a matter of months in GB to potentially years here, and that's just on one site. If you upscale that up and quantify it across the hundreds, if not thousands, of sites where we're looking to upgrade as part of this investment, you can imagine the kind of the difference in both cost and speed.
I was just going to add a little bit of figures onto that. So Vodafone 3 commissioned a bit of independent research with WPI Economics in terms of how much, just general, how much would 5G deployment across operators be worth to Northern Irish economy in terms of added to the gross value of the Northern Irish economy, and that was 1.6 billion by 2035. Was if we had the current planning restrictions that we have, that would go to 2.2 billion if we were to have the planning reform that we're asking for and through Mobile UK, Mobile Infrastructure Forum we're advocating for. So just a case of that in terms of economic value for you. That's just some research that we've highlighted. Sorry, Gareth.
Yeah, thank you. I think what you're hearing, that the prior approval system is critical. It takes us down from years to months to days. 56 days or 28 days in without notification. That is significantly faster, and that is what we just don't have here. And to consider, is that a contentious issue? It exists, a prior approval system in Northern Ireland, in Scotland, Wales, and England. It is not contentious there. I think the other part to add to that is the resources that puts back into councils. If they are not dealing with planning applications that take years and having to get consultees back and etc., that provides them with more resources, with more money as well into the system, because they're not dealing with all applications as the way they do and the length of time they do at the moment. And just to add, this is a big part of the conversation we're having elsewhere in other jurisdictions. That's why we're looking to improve that again. And I think, we had a prior PDR permitted development legislation here that was brought in 2020. In England, Scotland, we've had that already twice more, and now we're looking at it again to improve that because of the changes. And I don't want to stress this even further. It's not because we just want to ride roughshod over a planning system. That is not it. There are rules in place that mean things have to look the way they do, where they have to be cited. This is more about changing technologies. There's changing of the masts themselves. Where one of the asks that we have is more sharing. That means you need a bigger mast. If we want to put 5G, 4G and other technologies onto it, we need more antennas on that mast. Again, that's often unintended consequences of the current planning, that if you put an existing or a couple of antennas on an existing mast, we need to go into full planning. The unintended consequence there is that it's actually then more beneficial to find a new site than use one that's already in existence. So again, the time element here is really what it is. Time, resource and cost is not just on us as an industry, but equally local authorities as well. Yes. So not only can we get it in quicker, but it frees up resource as well.
There's actually a really good example, and this will apply to hundreds of these types of sites, in terms of just a minor tweak to this legislation that saves massive time. So currently, if I need to replace like a street works pole, we call it, in the highway, and because the replacement site might need a slightly bigger foundation, it can't go in that exact route. The current PD regs will allow us to move it within 6 metres of where it currently is. If it goes 6.1 metres away, I now need an application. In England and Wales, you don't have that defined parameter, and so there's lots of cases where we need to move these sites more than 6 metres away, as close as possible. It might be 6.5 metres, 7 metres. They're still reasonably close. We might have to move them in that distance because there's underground services, and our slightly bigger foundation is going to impact that. The difference being, in England and Wales, that will be just a permitted development notification of 28 days for that minor relocation. Here, beyond 6 metres, you're going into that really arduous, onerous long, full planning process that could take a year. And that is just with the most minorest little tweak, not even counting the prior approval system. That's just straight to permitted development. And it just shows you one barrier to upgrade one single site, and how one small tweak could make that go significantly faster.
Thank you, guys. Apologies for being parochial, by the way, but it would be remiss of me on behalf of my constituents not to raise those. And I'm buoyant that investment is coming into those areas if we can streamline this even further. The rest of the committee are at Coil Springs, so Stephen is going to come in first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, folks, for your presentation. I know I've met a number of you. Recognise a few names from emails as well, so it's good to put faces to names, certainly. Digital connectivity obviously is so important, and I appreciate the well-made points around capacity and coverage of all so many devices now, as you've pointed out, and the demands on networks have never been greater. Just to go back to the permitted development issue, to give an example of an issue we had recently, well, a number of years ago in my constituency in Bangor, where a very high density residential area, a proposal was put in to put a large mast in. And it was on a public footpath, a DFI footpath, and it caused great uproar locally. So I suppose it's just, I think there needs to be a balance as well. Yes, I appreciate the demand that we all want and need, high connectivity, but that caused a lot of local concern, for example, and that's where, I have some concerns in terms of a prior approval system where that could just be put in without any consultation, without any say. So this went on, and then the planning committee then turned down this particular application. Now, very close to this site were acres and acres of green fields, which would have been much better suited. So I suppose the question is, was the DFI footpath chosen because it was cheaper than going to a private landlord to site?
So I don't know that specific site.
Yeah, no, appreciate that.
All I can say is, so the prior approval system that we're looking to, it still facilitates a decision-making process. It still facilitates the consultation that you refer.
I think that's so important as well.
Well, exactly. So, for example, whenever I'm submitting an application for prior approval across the water, before that goes in, we will do what we call best practice consultation, and that best practice consultation is defined in a code of best practice, which actually, incidentally, we want to work with the department to create here, to partner with a change in the legislation. And we would do pre-application, we would consult ward councillors, MLAs, MPs, schools, community or parish councils, etc., even before the application goes in, and works with them. Then, whenever the application goes in, we still need to go through a very robust, we call it a sequential test, where we will look at numerous discounted options in and around the search area, and effectively try and present that, while it might not be perfect, this is the best viable siting that we can place this to deliver the service we need. That is then assessed by the planning authority, and there is still scope to refuse that. So the introduction of a prior approval and as part of that process, as well as our pre-application consultation, the local authority will still do their own consultation. There'll be an advertisement in the newspaper, they'll put up site notices, they'll do mail drops to nearby residents. They will all have the ability to input into that, as will the statutory consultees like roads, etc. So prior approval process isn't just, we can go and do what we want. It just means that there's a defined time scale, but the consultation happens both with us and them, and there is still the ability to say no. There's still, if something is entirely
Where does that ability lie? With the council or with the planning committee? Or
every council will have its own scheme of delegation.
Yeah.
So the majority of those, if something was going to be refused, I would expect most of it could be done via delegated to the council's planning officer, but there will be the ability to call in by a planning committee. So, for example, if a planning officer was going to approve something and a local councillor thought it was inappropriate, then he would have the ability to call that in to be considered by a planning committee. That mechanism exists under prior approval in the same way it does full planning, so it doesn't relinquish any of that control. In terms of your point around why do we not go in greenfield instead of on the highway? It certainly would have been nothing to do with the cost. I can assure you of that. There's a lot of cost in terms of rerouting services and stuff when you're on the highway as well. the truth is some landowners simply just don't want to host you.
Yeah.
And if they say no, we don't have the there's the Electronic Communications Code, but we want to get to consensual agreements with landowners. And if a landowner who owns those greenfields says no, absolutely, I'm not hosting you because likely I'll get a lot of backlash from a community, then we have to try and move and find an alternative solution. And
appreciate
so
it needs to be located then close to the properties too. That's the balancing act, really, I suppose, isn't it?
With the spectrums that are now being used for 5G, they're much higher frequency, which means they don't propagate very far, and they don't propagate through materials as well. So this is all just physics. So that means that we need to be directly where that demand is. So if you've got a dense residential area, all wanting connectivity, we now have to site within that residential area. Whereas in the past, we could have sited in a field or an industrial area and beamed the service back in. With the principles of 5G connectivity, that's not possible. And again, we need an updated DECAN 14 document that's fit for purpose for this modern infrastructure, not written in 2008 before this even existed, to explain that.
Yeah. With the technology obviously advancing, are the days of 20 to 30 metre masts, is that still the only option for you to ultimately improve connectivity?
So it's horses for courses. I mean, we don't. Everything we do is bespoke in a sense, and that we will look at a certain area, we will look at where the trees are, the buildings are, the topography, where we're trying to service, and we will propose a site in its location and design depending on those very localised nuances and constraints. There's no one size fits all answer to this.
I appreciate there's great connectivity in many areas, but there is.
Can I just say on the height aspect, it is worth understanding that the higher a mast is, the broader an area it can cover. The more you bring it in, the more infrastructure you need. And it's always an interesting thing on areas of outstanding natural beauty, national parks. We have more restrictive planning, which effectively means you need more masts if you can't go higher. So height does help with propagation. Equally in suburban areas where you don't have buildings to put on top of on a rooftop, we need a mast that gets above those buildings. So again, one of the aspects we're looking at is 20 metre masts in suburban areas. So height is important, but equally in its urban areas, we need denser networks as well, because as Sean said, the newer technologies, 5G and 5GSA, don't propagate as far as others.
I appreciate that, and there's areas even 5 minutes behind this building in the Craigantlet area, which I represent, for example, the signal is terrible, the black spots exist, so it's not just one end of the province, and one of the closest towns to this building, Hollywood, is terrible signal as well, for example, mobile.
Again, so it's important to understand that where we put the masts, or where we designate them, it is because there is demand needed in those areas. Yeah. Moving them out of those areas means that demand that needs it will have less ability to exploit that demand that's there. So again, as Sean said, the rigours that we go through to choose those locations are very high. And I just wanted to touch on that code of best practice. It's one thing, we don't have a code of best practice in Northern Ireland. There is a code of best practice in all the other jurisdictions, and they are penned by the government departments. The Welsh government publishes code of best practice. DCIT in England publishes its code of practice in Scotland. We are looking for one over here. It sets the rules of the games. It's exactly what you can look at. Are we working within what we have said to? And we take the code of practice as a very important piece of work. Over here, our concern at the moment is that there is no lead that wants to essentially publish that code or work with us to build a code of practice and publish it. If it is not a departmental lead that runs that, our concern is it has no weight.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Just touching on that then, obviously the key role for infrastructure and economy departments that you've touched upon earlier. Do you feel, what level of engagement have you had with the ministers? Do you feel they're taking an active interest enough in it? And do you think they could do more in terms of what commitment they've given you? And then just linking that in with the mobile action plan and the NI barrier busting task force, which is quite a mouthful. Just in terms of that, how are they going? Are they effective enough?
I think it's worth pointing out at the moment, from what we understand, the Northern Ireland Barrier Busting Task Force and the Mobile Action Plan are coming to an end. It's why I am stressing that what we would like to understand is what's next, what's the strategy for mobile for Northern Ireland. In terms of engagement, we have met over the last, I think, 4 or 5 months. We met with the Ministers of Economy and Infrastructure. We have a commitment to look at this, and we have seen some proposals that have gone forward. We recently received communication that they want to have bilateral discussions with the industry. We're very keen to do that. What we want to do is make sure that's formalised and we have dates and times and a vehicle to do that.
Okay, thank you. Just very quickly, final point from me, Chair. Just you'd mentioned the vandalism in some areas. We're seeing that in parts of Belfast, West Belfast, for example, which obviously is vandalism and it's illegal vandalism. Do you feel enough is being done, particularly at ministerial level, for example, to highlight, the dangers and the issues around that? Do you feel, or do you think more could be done to?
Yeah, I mean, Keith Archibald published a very, very useful article in Andersonstown News about the arson attacks at that time. I think more communication is always beneficial. It is a tough one. I mean, the people of the mindset who are going to do that damage for the reasons that they have in their head, are they going to really, really listen to what's been said? Probably not, but it certainly helps. The more communication there is out there about how impactful that sort of damage is to communities, it almost kind of begins to police itself a little bit, because more people are reporting it, keeping an eye for it, etc. So more communication is certainly welcome. But there has been stuff done around that, and we have had actually conversations with the PSNI and actually Belfast City Council in that example, where they were saying, well, why are you putting these sites in the street scene? Why do you not put them on a rooftop, etc.? In some cases there are no rooftops or places to put them, and they have to go there. But it has facilitated conversations where Belfast City Council have said, well, you know what, we do have a building nearby, why do you not go on our rooftop? And that will be a way of negating this happening, because it's not so easy to get at. And we have done that, and every cloud is a silver lining, and that has facilitated that conversation. But circling back to the mobile action plan, I mean, that example I just gave is a perfect example of the use of public sector assets. One of the main aspects in the mobile action plan was allowing us more use of public sector assets, and I mean, I don't think we got too far on that either, did we, Gareth? But that would have been really helpful as well.
Okay, thanks, gentlemen. Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Harry?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I was just going to carry on a bit from that. Well, priority, first of all, would maybe say was given to broadband. So would you say it should be maybe better now, more attention being given to mobile? And then I was going to also ask you, which Stephen has elaborated on a bit, the mobile action plan and the pathway to progress, would you have found them useful?
I think just in answer them, I'm wary that others can come in, but priority, I think, is where we are at the moment. We are seeing this across other jurisdictions in the Republic. Mobile is now very much considered a part of where they want to do it. So the mobile market review in England is now put this up as a critical point. It's critical national infrastructure. This is no longer a luxury. I think if we look at where technologies are going, both in mobile in terms of how you use your mobile phone, Internet of Things, essentially everything is now connected, even without a device with a screen. We live in a world now that this is important. We've done, Project Stratum has been really impressive in Northern Ireland. What we now need to do is get a strategy for mobile.
I would just add that I think that this mobile market review that was announced yesterday is really going to be the key to that, and I can share with the committee a report that we commissioned last year to look at what are the economic benefits that could be unlocked, and I think that it's really good to see that this has happened yesterday, and I think that really sort of focuses the mind everywhere on what can we do to make sure that we're reaching the potential. A lot of comparisons have been made today in terms of what's happened in different parts of the UK, but I think in the report we wanted to look at how UK was faring compared with internationally as well, and I think there are some comparisons with what's happening elsewhere around the world, which I think are really sort of a wake-up call for us already, that we do need to now pay more attention to this, exactly as the point that you made, to follow up on the success that you've had locally with rolling out the broadband network. So we need both of them. I think to just help people understand that it's about the fact that, as we've kind of suggested, more and more people are wanting this connectivity when they're on the move as well as when they're in a fixed location.
And you'd mentioned there were 70 sites for upgrade. Could you possibly, I'm not going to ask you to go through all those now, but could you possibly send the committee the details of where all those areas are? And you also mentioned that there'll be some new areas for new mass, if you could possibly let us know where they would be. And I think to move on from that, Chair, if I could, upgrades are all well and good, new is good, but there are a lot of places that are fighting outages. I think particular Ballynahinch, even this morning again, huge area, got a message this morning, network down, use WhatsApp, so we're back on the broadband. This is an area which is continually breaking down. So if we need to maintain what we have first before we upgrade. I know upgrades may help, but there's a problem there that obviously needs addressed, because this is happening at least 2 or 3 times a month.
Resilience is I think every infrastructure company is finding resilience it is a problem, and it's going to be a bigger problem with climate change and these storms that we have now that we didn't used to have. A lot of the reasons our sites go down are because the power to those sites goes down, and that's something that is kind of somewhat out of our control. We do want to build in resilience in terms of potentially putting solar arrays at the base that can pick up the slack whenever mains does go out, or a generator, and we can do generators within compounds that attenuate the noise. We can use things other than diesel to power them, so that is absolutely something that we're definitely looking at because of these storms and the resilience elements around that. Yeah.
Just to add to that, there are ongoing discussions both with the regulators and UK-wide about resilience and how to do that. And I think there are equally a lot of discussions that need to think about the practicalities of that. For instance, if you are in a rural area, often people don't want a generator out there, and there may be other ways to look at that. Equally, it expands the footprint of that mast if you have a generator on site, which can impact on planning once again. But equally, it's then what is the possibility? If you were to have a 1 hour battery backup, that's not very useful if it's out for 6 hours or something. So again, we are having those discussions at the moment, and that is very much about how do we deal with resilience, and say as a UK wide.
Yeah, happy to send on your point in terms of our merger plans, and happy to send any of the committee members here our plans for your constituency. As you can expect, some of it's commercially sensitive with other people in the room, but happy to share that. And in terms of resilience, industry Vodafone group, of which we are a part of, have got a partnership with AST Space Mobile. So the extra element of the resilience is the satellites, mobile satellite connectivity. But that's something that's rapidly launching. I know Nick will probably jump in on that as well. Yeah, but that's something as well as an extra element, not just battery backup, but how can we have some resilience that's not on the ground, if that makes sense. So again, happy to follow up with more information on that. Yep.
And Will, maybe you're responsible for EE3 and also, can you elaborate on that, please?
The resilience aspect is quite critical. You also mentioned earlier on that there are areas where there are particular hotspots. Anecdotal information about hotspots or poor connectivity is complex. As you can imagine, if you've ever had to set up a Wi-Fi in your own home, trying to get the right location, trying to find out whether the kitchen at the back or a back bedroom has connectivity and actually connects to the Wi-Fi. If you can imagine expanding that on a national level and trying to use lots of different frequencies, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, and we're switching off 2G and 3G. So 4G and 5G work on a very different part of the radio spectrum. It also depends on what type of phone you've got, because all of this doesn't work unless the phone can connect back with the network, with the mast itself. And the phone is small, with a small battery, with a small antenna. You could be in a vehicle, you could be amongst some dense trees in leaf, you could be inside a building. We don't know any of that. And going back to the original issue about 99% coverage, it may well be that it's 99% coverage outdoor and the person that's complaining is indoor or in a car, or their phone is being shielded, or their battery's low, or they haven't updated their battery. The phone themselves upgraded it. So there are lots of issues that we are outside our control, but we're trying to work to see if we can improve the connectivity. So, as you said, resilience is one, to make sure the actual site works all the time. Then there's trying to optimize it to make sure it works with the right technology that we've got. But it also is dependent on the end user, where they are, what they're doing, how many of them are there. You may get 4 bars on your phone but say no network available. That means there are too many people trying to access, and the network won't accept any more connections. So it's a highly complex situation. And going back to the analogy of setting up your own Wi-Fi, we're doing that, and we're upgrading and putting new technology in it all the time. And the planning system can only help with that. When we're having all these number of changes, and we're dealing with a regulatory system that is outdated, effectively, and behind the times of the other devolved regions in Great Britain, we've got one hand tied behind our back, and this is the opportunity to try and open that up and provide that connectivity.
I think in some cases, and though you mentioned power down, this happens when power's good, weather's reasonable, so it is within your control as such. It's not. Do you know what I mean? So
there are some. I mean, again, I don't know the specific case you're talking about, but sometimes sites go down because. I'm sorry for getting a little bit technical on this, but all of these sites have to be connected in to a network, ideally via fibre. We call it backhaul, but sometimes that backhaul has to be provided to really remote sites via microwave dish link. Okay. So what that means is you've got a site here which has got fibre backhaul, and then it needs to connect to this site maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometres away via a microwave dish link. That is a 300mm dish looking with a perfect line of sight to a 300mm dish over a course of 3, 4, 5 kilometres. If I put my hand in front of that dish link, that will be enough to bring that whole site down. And so what you could see, or what could be happening in those cases, especially in the summertime, for example, is trees and branches are getting in the way of that link, which is taking down the site. But it's another justification as to why we need height. The higher we can go, the more clear the line of sight is, and the less likelihood you're going to get those outages because of a backhaul dish link being blocked.
No, I totally get you. I mean, the chairs even mentioned the problem is if it's happening continuously, you would think the fault could be found and rectified, but I do appreciate your explanation.
Yes. As an example of a sort of anecdotal example of that, we had an issue with one site in a city in England, and the site kept going down. Yeah. And the engineer went to visit the site and stood there and then saw a crane building a building next door, and every time the crane moved around, it broke the transmission link, and then the site came back on again as it moved. Those sort of things we have no control over, and we need to then work with adjacent developers and people but as Sean said, it could be trees, it could be all manner of different things. It could be the dish has been hit by the weather and has actually shifted slightly, and it's not lined up perfectly with the other dish and the other sites. So there are all sorts of things like that we're actually going out and maintaining and improving all the time. But any technical changes that we need to do, a slightly bigger dish, different location, a heavier dish, so we need a taller mast or a thicker mast, it comes back to the planning system, and that holds things up.
It would maybe be good to have a report on that. I appreciate it, and the chair as well.
Yeah, I'd get you down to Ballinhinch and look for a crane. That might be the cause, my friends. You never know. You find the solution. Before I bring in Cahill, I mean, those points are well made, Will, and probably for the committee and for anyone tuned into, they probably learned a lot about just how the system works. We take things for granted. I don't know how the internet particularly works. I just know that when I want it, it's there. I don't need to know, but let the buyer beware, because a lot of buyers do go into mobile phone shops or online now more and more by their phone and just assume when they go online and see 99% coverage, that's what they're going to get.
And the assumption may be that...
And the assumption may be they don't know that the branch is going to make a difference, or if they're in their car, it's going to make a difference. Those things aren't set out by the salesperson. Maybe they should be, maybe they shouldn't be, but that's unfortunately who we deal with on a daily basis, and maybe they're slightly unaware of how that process works, and that creates frustration as well.
The assumption may be that site, that area has got no coverage.
Yes.
Although they've looked on the website. They may come back to you and say, this part of the countryside's rubbish, doesn't have any coverage. And then we actually drill down and find out, well, actually, you're on a different network. If you go on our network, you do have coverage. Or maybe it is our network that hasn't got the... Yes. There are different networks, and people sign up to different things. And I talked about the confusion between our companies. You can imagine the different names and organisations here. But there are only 4 mobile operators that build masts and operate masts. But if you go into Tesco, if you go into any online and get a mobile contract, you go with all manner of different organisations and companies, whether it is Tesco itself or Libara or whoever it is, you don't know who the network provider is.
Yeah.
and nobody really checks to see, oh no, I'm on O2 or I'm on EE or I'm on whoever. They think that they've got the contract with that person that they bought it from Tesco, say. So when they say that there's no coverage there, well, it may be that they just need to switch to a different operator, and they do have coverage, and that could be a solution.
Yes. Well, hopefully they're being advised that whenever they contact customer services, no doubt they are. If they contact me, which they do regularly, I will direct them that way. I'm conscious of time, gents, and I've got a number of members. Cathal wants to come in, first of all.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation, and it's been very important. And very, Gareth, you've sold it well between the group today. You've sold it well in terms of the challenges. And no, I'll not be given permission for the antenna to get up on tower cranes, by the way, just in case from a committee point of view. No, my point is, I want to really get, because as elected reps and representing the good area of Newry and Armagh, I'm disappointed to hear that, but I'm mindful that all the members have mentioned their own area. And I know I'm fairly over the planning system. My points probably relate to it more than anything else, because that's the key element you're raising today. And we've all been there. Like, I live in an area in the border region, and there's not spots there, and a lot of people accept it and move on, whatever they need to do, right? And hopefully at some point there'll be the technology to address all of that. But my point for yourself, and Sean, you mentioned about, you see, the greenfield sites, we wouldn't be, if I was sitting on the council as a councillor and somebody mentioned a greenfield site for Armagh, the first thing raised its head in terms of why you going out there, why do you need to be out there, and all the issues of challenges, and local people are entitled to challenge and put in an objection or whatever. But my key question for you is, I can't understand an established site. Do you know what I mean? In terms of like a brownfield site that's already there established, and putting new gear, or whatever you're doing with it, working. The question about the plan itself, and I want to ask this now. The SPPS you mentioned earlier on, but probably looking at it to try and get some kind of solution in terms of plan resolutions or even legislation. Permitted development over 2 or 3 year period would be something you could look at. If you had to review the whole policy and go again, would take a period of time. So I want to ask you about, see the permitted development rates. Have you had any conversation with the Minister in relation to this, the DFA Minister in relation to this? And I know that Stephen's mentioned the barrier busting group out of DFE, because it's important as well. But primarily the permitted development rates. What conversations have you had with it, with the Minister in relation?
We've, to be honest, the civil servants at the DFA and the Minister are probably fed up listening to me make the exact same points we've made here today, and the rationale why. So we have had lots of conversations with them. We had conversations with John O'Dowd and Conor Murphy at the start of last year. We've had meetings with Keith Archibald and Liz Kimmins about it here only a few months ago. So they are listening. They have given indications that this is something they absolutely do want to look at. I suppose our concern, and Gareth touched on this, is that was typically directed via the planning subgroup of the Barrier Busting Task Force, which was under the Mobile Action Plan, which was a DFE document. But all of the keys to the locks that we're talking about here today are owned by the DFI. You know, PD legislation is DF, like the SPPS, DECAN 14, and DECAN 14 being updated would be really useful as well, because you see all those technical things we're talking about that apply now, and line of sight and dishes connecting up, that could all be explained in a DECAN 14 document to help decision makers understand why a site has to be here, why it has to be that height, and then factor that into their decision making. But yeah, going back to your question, we have had conversations. There does seem to be a willingness to look at it, but our ask, I think, today is real ownership in terms of tangible next steps, like England have done, in terms of just going straight to a call for evidence, where we can take in all the views of everybody, not just from the industry. And hopefully move that forward. So there does seem to be a willingness, but I'd like, especially given the subgroup for the Barrier Busting Task Force, it seems to be closing down, ownership to move it forward.
I appreciate it, and what I'm trying to get at, what we can do as a committee. Do you understand me? Yeah. And it's interesting to hear you say about what the council done, who made the decisions, how the council made the decisions, how, you know, planning service made the decision, and that's fine. And see the resources NEA, and we get that right across the board. So but we're good to understand that. My real point is how we as a committee can move the thing forward for you, working with the minister. That's what I'm trying to get at. Because I've heard all the arguments, and you have articulated them all well. We could have a conversation with this all day and about the complaints we get and everything else. I'm just looking at your list of asks here. So PD rates is one of them. The other one is digital champions, the council. Now it may sit outside us, but if it's part of a legislative process, that's the kind of detail we're trying to get at. And if you're wishing to have real conversations about what we can do as a committee, because it's been a good conversation for us, and what I'm trying to get at is, we'll talk about this for the chair once she's leave to see how we can improve this, because we're all getting it. I'm not arguing about the technologies or who provides it. You know, you're coming here, there's challenges there, and what we have to do as a committee is to ask how we can move that process on. And so,
and
over to yourself,
if I can come back to Sean's point, we want this to be tangible. We want to know when, what through, what's the vehicle. And I just want to put, emphasise to the committee, we are willing to put the effort into this. I am sitting with a 50-page document, which is actually a cut through of some of them, about over 100 pages from our members, in response to the current planning permitted development rights consultation in England. That shows the effort we want to put to this. We believe it's important. We have investment, from the operators here who are standing ready to do that. So, that's what we want to get to. Is consultation. We will complete that consultation. We will put the effort into that. We will highlight what we feel needs to change, where it needs to change. Obviously, it's not up to us. We are providing an opinion. That is up to the departments then and the ministers to make the decision on when to take that forward. But as Sean said, it's when and how can we do that? Because we really stand ready to do that. We've outlined the issue. We've outlined the barriers. Let's now work through it with them to go. So I think, if the committee it's that question. We have a mobile action plan that is winding down. What are the next steps? We are looking. We have an indication that there will be bilateral discussions with the DFI. That's fantastic. Let's get them in, and let's do it.
No, appreciate it. Just a final point, Chair, because I know all the members want to come in. We're on. I agree with you, Gareth. The point for us is, if we go after the SPPS and then it's a consultation process and all of that, do you understand me? And what I'm saying to you, DFA, you mentioned 2 or 3 departments already, communities and finance and everything else. All I'm saying for ourselves, after listening to what you have said, and most of the questions have been broached in terms of what your presentation has been, for us as a committee, we're trying to get at the hub of it. Permitted development seems to be, we know the minister, DFA minister this week, in the trainee planning programme that just started, there's other elements out there we need to get at. That's a slightly different argument, but it may be hold up to the process. But that's what we're trying. Yeah.
I would love timescales. If you're asking for a wish list of what would really make a very tangible difference, and it would still take probably 9 months to get through with a fair wind, but even if it was agreed tomorrow, I'd love to see a date set for a call for evidence or permitted development reform, and then to accompany that change in legislation, an updated guidance document, whether that be an updated DECAN 14 or a new code of best practice document. And we would be, that is all within the control of the DFI, and we would be wanting to help them do that as much as we possibly could. We're willing to put time and resource into helping them do that. In terms of the SPPS, I appreciate that is a much more difficult one. That is a much bigger document. That's policy. You need to bring in more people, but it can be done. The renewables section of the SPPS got updated relatively recently, so there is the scope to update one section of it, and I think we could do that with the telecom section. But the first bits would be the PD reg reform and DECAN 14 / a code of best practice.
Okay, just
last question.
Definitely, let me in. Fair play to the chair. Let me, because I've listened to all the rest of them.
Important topic.
Because it is. But the other point you mentioned, and all of us were in favour of it, was Project Stratum, because especially as rural representatives, that has done a lot for us, and that married everything up and moved things further. So, I mean, if that model's out there and can be replicated some way, fine.
That was the DUP got you that, Cathal.
I mean, look, 100%.
Who's that there? Could you put that down right in there, because I can't confuse it, James.
Michael's got that down.
Taking the party politics out of this, this is why we are looking to the executive for a wider strategy for Northern Ireland for 5G. But again, I put that point. This is an opportune time. There is a consultation that we are working on for the National Planning Policy Framework, which is the equivalent of the SPSS. We are working on a consultation on the permitted development rights, which is what we're looking for. We're looking as part of that as well to update the code of practice. All of these discussions are happening now. All this evidence is being pulled together to respond to that. It is perfect and opportune time now to use all of this we're doing at the moment in other jurisdictions for Northern Ireland as well, and we will have those those figures and those issues. So it's now is really opportune, and I think that's what we're trying to say.
Enough, Cathal. Happy enough.
Yeah, sure, I could speak, but thank you very
we
much.
could all talk
Thank you
about this.
very much.
I should say, just to conclude, a mobile version of Project Stratum would be brilliant. That's,
We'll work on it.
We'll move on. Justin, you're never parochial, sure you're not?
Thanks, Chair. No, I will be parochial through it. It's part of my discussion for sure, but what I do sense here is huge exasperation. You're all very exercised by the challenges you face here, and you must be looking with envy over the hedge at the south and looking with envy over the water in the UK. So what you've spoken about fragmented leadership, and we've seen leadership of a different form today coming from the UK, where the Prime Minister in waiting has spoken about everybody returning to the office and what's the implications of that potentially for demand on your capacity. But fragmented leadership, who do you need to see leadership from?
I'd say it's it's across the board. We talk about the programme for government. That's the strategy for the whole of Northern Ireland. There wasn't the phrase digital infrastructure in that at all. And that's where we're looking. Really from the top down. Then I think we are looking at the DFI, as we've said many times. It holds a lot of the keys to the locks that Sean was mentioning. DFE leads this as well. So we do need coordination across departments. This is cross-departmental. And it impacts. If you think of Department for Health, they are looking to implement 5G into hospitals. That it matters across. I always try and explain this that we're not looking at. It's not your four pillars. We're the underpinnings of all those pillars. Mobile is critical for everything that we're doing now. It's not a add-on. So firstly, I'd say very much looking for Northern Ireland to be a place that puts itself out there. We want world-class connectivity. We need 5G and 5G standalone, and that needs to be written into those strategies. What we can do is then look at sort of what others that we've talked about on planning and others, and that can happen. But it is very much, we look at local development plans even on a local level. They rarely include the word mobile. It's very much focused on fixed. There needs to be parity now. It's digital infrastructure, and mobile is part of that. Not we've done Project Stratum. That's great, wonderful, excellent, brilliant. Now let's turn on to mobile. Let's prioritise that. So I think it is very much cross-departmental, and it covers everything that we're talking about. And so we've talked about social aspects as well, digital inclusion, and as I say, planning is obviously critical. I think planning is very much where we want to see movement.
Okay, you want to come in there?
Just briefly on your point about the future of work and the return to the office, I think this links in completely with that about, what we're looking at here is how we can use improved connectivity to improve productivity. And I think it's an interesting observation for me working across the devolved administrations would be that elsewhere we're starting to see more and more the digital infrastructure being linked into that digital economy piece as well, and especially bringing in the opportunities from AI, and also being very aware of the opportunities of managing AI, sort of the opportunities for that in the public sector, but also improving productivity for our small and medium businesses. So I think we're seeing more of a joined up approach in Edinburgh and in Cardiff as to linking all of these things together. And I think it would be, you asked us what we would like to see happen. I think knowing that there's a dedicated minister that's looking at this would be really good as to accompany a commitment to a slot for this in the legislative programme.
I mean, listen, some of the statutory consultees, for example, NAEA sit under DERA, HED sit under communities. Telecoms is typically an economy thing. Infrastructure hold all the keys to it, so you can see how this kind of spreads across the departments, but the big two, to be honest, are obviously economy and infrastructure hold all the keys here. Now look at how it works elsewhere. The current PD reg consultation that's out in England, that is a joint consultation run by DCIT and MHCLG. The equivalent of that here obviously would be the DFI and the DFE, and I would expect a similar partnership and a call for evidence for what we're trying to do here.
In terms of localised, there was a proposal to put a mast beside a play park in Bleaks in South Armagh, and local opposition was massive, so it didn't happen. And understandably, so there's a big fear factor here in terms of the masts and the potential for radiation. I've had this discussion with you in person in our previous meetings, and so in terms of leadership, where's the leadership from industry? In terms of the education piece around radiation or threats, or otherwise of the same, what's the industry doing to ameliorate concerns locally in terms of opposition to masts? There's I'm glad that there's a mast on the side of Slieve Gullion or mythical mountain. Actually, I'm not glad there is a mast on the side of Slieve. I'm glad of the coverage it provides, but I don't think enough efforts were made in terms of the construction of that mast, the planning for that mast, where it could have been presented as a tree, a local tree, which would have taken away the eyesore factor that it presents. Is there nowhere out of bounds in terms of where masts should be sited? Have you no inhibitions about where you site a mast? It's just net coverage or nothing. Where's leadership from industry? Do you just want to put a mast anywhere or is nowhere out of bounds? And a big concern probably now is in terms of that permitted development piece. What's permitted, and there has to be guardrails there in terms of what potentially where a mast can be sited. And so, can you give me a perspective on what I've just outlined?
Yep. Well, sorry. Go on.
No. To be honest, I think I kind of answered some of that in a previous response, in that the permitted development changes that we're asking for, the upgrade stuff, it is largely very, very minimal works anyway. As Gareth said, the planning success rates are incredibly high. The issue is timing, but the fact that they're incredibly high just shows that actually they are acceptable in planning terms, and they typically go through the process and be approved. In terms of the pre-approval process specifically, I just want to assure everybody here that there are huge safeguards within that in terms of consultation, us having to prove that it's the right and the best site, and the ability for either a delegated officer at a council or a planning committee to say no. And so I think there's the perception that a prior approval process is just carte blanche, do what we want, put anything anywhere. It's absolutely not that. There is still a very detailed and stringent application process to go through before we can do that. In terms of the Slieve Gullion one, that was part of the Shared Rural Network programme. I worked on that one actually, so I do know that one. All I can say is the challenges around that kind of rural deployment is incredible. We have to build sites in very, very specific locations, taking account of the topography and how that deals with radio waves, etc. That particular programme was even more difficult in terms of siting, because it was a government programme bringing all 4 UK mobile network operators together, and they all had to show where they did and didn't have coverage, with all the kind of commercial and competition sensitivities that goes with that. And through that, they produced what we called a pixel map, and that pixel map defined where we could and couldn't go to provide that level of service under that programme. And that meant siting options were incredibly difficult. The Slieve Gullion one, obviously very challenging because it's the AONB there, wholly respect that, but that was the only site that we could find, not the only site, it was, believe it or not, the best site that we could find that would provide that level of service while taking account of all of those technical factors, from radio propagation, topography, suiting all 3 sharing operators. You mentioned tree masts. Some of them, to be honest, they're fine at a distance. You get closer and they look horrific, and it's kind of horses for courses. But the tree masts don't have the same structural capability as what the lattice has at Slieve Gullion, and a tree mast in that location probably wouldn't have been shareable from a structural point of view, whereas in that case we were able to get 3 operators on that shared. And while you might perceive that as an eyesore, if we weren't able to get a structure that could share in that sense, we might have had to build 3 separate sites around that area, 1 for each sharing operator, and instead we consolidate it. And I think that's probably the the least worst option in terms of the cumulative impact that 3 might have had versus that 1 that was shared.
So there's no question it is an eyesore, but it's gratefully or thankfully it's not on the top of Slieve Gullion or any top of mountains out of bounds, right?
Our radio planners would have loved it up there, to be honest.
Thank God.
But because we respect the landscape sensitivity there, it is designated AOMB. We had to compromise and move it down, and yeah.
Okay, well, listen, people in South Ireland are glad for in terms of the
Justin, can I just quickly come back on what the industry is doing as well? Because, one of the reasons we want the code of practice is because that sets the rules of the game between us and local authorities, sets what we will do and how we'll do it and where it should and shouldn't go. And we want that information to be available so people can look it up and it's transparent. Again, as I say, we are struggling to find any department that will put their name to it and then publish it as a departmental document. Just on the, you mentioned 5G and health concerns. We have invested heavily in a 5G Check the Facts website. We cannot get that onto any government website over here to provide that information to be available. It's been 3 years through the Mobile Action Plan, and it's still not even as a link. So we are very happy, and I will put this offer out to the committee that if your council wants someone to come in and speak about radio frequencies, electromagnetic frequencies and how they work and the issues you raised, I am happy to do that. Part of my role as public affairs is to go and speak to councils and make them aware, and as I say, we've got that information behind it. We would really love that to be linked into on a Northern Ireland government website somewhere, so people can actually view that, or the equivalent of public health over here. As Sean says, the planning system is the guardrail, and we have to work within that system. We're not seeking for that to be taken away. What we want is to ensure that it acts within and enables the ability for us to build the networks and the technology changes that are happening, and very much so in keeping with how people want that as well. And that's why, even with prior approval, there are still rights of refusal on the council. So I think we very much want to work within. This is for your constituents, and then they are utilising this. And what I think was really fascinating with the master tax in West Belfast, and there were a few others elsewhere, the response that came back from the community wasn't, we don't want this, they were, when are you going to get it back? We need this infrastructure in place. And that was really fascinating to see that. And I think we've changed, and the attitude to this is now more permissive, and it's looking, well, I want my signal. I want to be able to use my mobile phone. But I do stress, to have a signal, you need that physical infrastructure as well.
William Blake said to me, you can put the mobile phone mast in my backyard and I don't care, I want my mobile phone network. So I get where you're coming from there. Capacity and coverage. The bigger issue now for you is capacity, and where is AI in relation to that demand on capacity? Obviously the proliferation of AI, the exponential growth of AI and demands of it, from a capacity perspective, how's that impact you?
We're seeing growth on our networks every year. And if you look at Ofcom's and how it's doing, it used to be 40%, I think now 15%, it's turned to 20%. The figures are always there. It's rising exponentially. Equally, how do you use AI? It's mostly through apps. It's going to be through your mobile phone. So we can only expect this to increase. And again, as you rightly said, that is why the upgrade element is so important. And if you look at the plans that we have now that are going forward, it is far more focused on upgrades than it is on new infrastructure at the present time. And that, again, is about having the planning system right. I go back to that point. At the moment, we have restrictions on whether you can have 3 antennas. We need more to add capacity into it. That takes us into full planning. The unintended consequences, sometimes there is a mast that sits there that the community are perfectly happy with, but we're forced off of that and have to find a new site. That just doesn't work. Let's work how the system works, how the technology's changed, and we can make sure that the planning system works with it and for your communities as well.
And these are obviously the hardware folks, the software, the guardrails in terms of AI, where that goes potentially downstream. Use capacity to pull the plug as need be.
That one. Leave that for another day, Justin. We're going to have a whole conference on that. We've got one final question from Andrew, or questions.
Well, to be fair, Chair, I normally say this out of generosity that all the subjects have been covered, but I think it's actually pretty much true. Thank you very much. I suppose really the only one I do thank you for, I think Mr. McHenry, sorry, I've done my glasses on. the clarification on no carte blanche for planning, I think, was helpful. Although the only thing I would say is that, and again, sort of nearly alluding to what Mr. McNulty was saying, that sometimes, what's best for the operator may not be the best for the community. If that, and I'm again, since everyone else has, I will too. I'm thinking very, very parochially of a mast that's been proposed for a forest park in my constituency area. And again, it's everyone. Of course, everyone has the benefit and knows the benefit and needs the benefit and wants to use the mobile phone and all that goes with it. But again, there is a balancing act. So I suppose we just pass it there. And I mean, genuinely, whatever about one bar in Carrick, there's only one bar in room 258 up here, so there is. But,
you want another bar still?
You put one up on top of the roof and through the walls.
But no, thank you.
You get your dish there outside your window there.
We'll leave it at that.
You've been very, very kind with your time. The one final thing I wanted to ask about, it was touched on, the appointment of digital champions elsewhere and how beneficial you think that could be here in terms of lobbying, particularly around the mistruths or the misunderstandings are out there, or making sure that councils, planners liaising with central government. How vital is that role, do you think?
It's a very good question, and I think we see digital champions as extremely helpful. And Northern Ireland, again, another positive for Northern Ireland, has a digital champion in all 11 councils, which is, well, I can't say is not the same elsewhere. Yeah. But I think the issue is making sure they are fully resourced, they are dedicated positions. I think what we have often is that they are sort of 10%, 20% of someone's job, and therefore you can't focus on it in entirely. What they do is they give us a single point of contact. Just as much as councils don't necessarily know who to come to in our industry, we don't know who to go to at councils in all. And they build that build those relationships. Equally, they can have a role with local constituents and residents in building out why this is important. And also, and I think this is really important, is taking away perceptions and myths around masts as well. We've heard there's lattice kind of things, but often what we get told and what people think is going up is an electricity pylon that is 700 feet high or something like that. And it's generally not. Often they're monopoles, they're built more like a lamppost, they just don't have a light on top. But people have certain perceptions. It's equally, understanding why you need that mobile connectivity. What does it really give you, and what will it give you as well? So that community role is really, really important. But again, that engaging with us, working through the planning system, having those discussions about, that's going to be a difficult place to put it. Have you got any other ideas? We think this. We can have those discussions. So ultimately, we're defined by radio physics. It always astounds me if you go into a field in the middle of nowhere. There's no one there that actually needs that signal. So we do need it where demand is. But we can have those conversations and we can work it out. But if there isn't that conduit within councils, often there isn't the expertise and understanding of what to do. So I would say, we do value it. I think we've put some statistics, we've got a report I'm happy to share with the committee, but the relationship is 4 times better with the industry where there are digital champions. It's 4 times more likely that more permissive around that infrastructure where a digital champion is. So we do think it's very important.
Yeah. Nick, do you want to come in? Sorry.
Yeah, just briefly, a single point of contact at local authority level is really important in a sector where there's ongoing change. So for us, they've been really, really useful in the areas where they've had them for the transition, the digital voice switch over. And that's been really particularly useful, getting information to people that use telecare devices, etc., and managing that period of change. So really useful.
I suppose just to give an in practice or a practical example of the benefit, it also can help lead to better solutions, right? So I'll give you an example. In Glasgow, we were having quite a few issues trying to put street works poles in place on the adopted highway, and the planners were saying that's in a visibility layer, that's going to impact pedestrian footfall on that footpath. Why do you not just go on that unadopted verge that's beside it? And up to that point we couldn't, because Glasgow City Council owned that green verge, the little sliver of land, no use for anything else, and they just wouldn't sign an estates agreement with us for no other reason other than just principle. the digital champion in the dedicated telecoms unit the Glasgow City Council set up was able to go in, speak to their estates department and say, you know, if you let them on this little bit of land that's useless for every other reason, it means we get connectivity that's going to feed into the Glasgow City deal and boost our economy, which is what we all want. But secondly, the planners within this council are going to be significantly more happier with the proposal, and the operators will be happy too. So everybody wins with just a little bit of pragmatism. But it took an in-house digital champion to be able to join those dots up between the various departments and actually make that real. Now we use that many times with Glasgow. We've got agreed valuation principles, we've got agreed terms, and it's just a standard template, and we just go in and get it done, and it just leads to a much better solution, much quicker for everybody.
Really useful. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming along today, for your time. Really good session. There's a number of action points. We'll no doubt liaise back with yourselves via the committee, and we'll be writing to the Minister on the back of the points you've made today. Okay.
Thank you very
Brilliant.
much.
Thank you so much. Can I get retrospective approval to get this recorded by Hansard? Because they've been scribbling frantically. It'd be a shame if you didn't approve it. It'd be a waste of 2 hours.
I agree.
Good to know. A number of action points, members. I know that I asked that we do write to the Minister regarding the concerns and the points that have been made. There's clearly a commitment that they're going to do something by the sounds of it, but not a lot of detail on time frame, and I think that is of the essence. I'm not saying that we pin down as a committee our position, particularly around permitted development, whether that may be, but what the Minister and the Department intend to do. Are we content to write along those lines? Yeah. Do you have enough, Michael, from that session?
Are there specifics that members wanted to write about? An update on what's been done about guidance,
yes,
planning guidance, what's been done around
the prior approval system, changes to that.
There seems to be some conversation there already. So
yes, I would imagine they'll be They'll be aware of the issues anyway, Michael, but if we could ask around that.
Chair, would it be suitable to ask the 70 sites of upgrade?
Oh, they're going to provide.
They're going to provide that to us.
The commercially sensitive ones, they may not.
They'll be redacted. Just have to guess.
They may have some redacted, but they're going to provide some information to say that.
We're asking industry for their pixel map
of coverage. Yeah, we were sitting frantically and analysing it during the committee there. It says I've got full bars, I can guarantee I don't in my house. But yeah, that would be useful. As to there does seem to be a bit of confusion about what is the industry says is available and what consumers are saying is available.
Well, I mean, you don't want the old tower crane swinging around top of you, but you know,
that's also really true.
We get an old signal there, but you know.
Can we not disguise masts as trees for Andrew? No.
We're going to try that, mate.
Are you content, Michael, with the direction of travel in that respect? Anything else regarding that, members, that you want to follow up on? The only thing I thought was the 11 digital champions that exist, just to get a flavour for maybe how each council's doing that and how that's maybe affecting their engagement with the sector and with planning. I would imagine that when our councils there's 11 different models probably being used and 11 different processes. I'm just interested, do we have anything on the work that they're doing at the minute?
We could probably get the library just to
do a quick piece.
Yeah, do a quick piece on what each of the councils have in terms of digital champion.
I'll do that. Content members? Yes. Carol, I'm going as fast as I can. You can pack away.
All right, John, I'm going as fast as I can. Trust me, I'm going as quickly.
Thankfully, we completed the rest of the business, except for a forward work plan is completed, members. AOB, I just wanted to raise the welcome on behalf of the committee. I don't think we've done that with the £7.85 million investment with the roads network that was announced last week. I think we'll all agree on the back of the issues that we've seen in the last few months and the ongoing issues that it's vitally needed. I would just like to, on behalf of the committee and others can feed in, get some clarity on that, where it's going to be spent, how it's going to be spent, what engagement they've had with the Mineral Products Association regarding it, how it will feed into next year's spends to ensure continuity, where it's going to be split up between the divisions, whether it's going to be patchworks or resurfacing schemes. There's a lot of questions, and as a committee, certainly I'd like to know how it's going to be delivered most effectively with the most bang for buck. I think they're fair questions to ask.
Yeah.
I don't think
Programme of works for the Amakian Road.
you want to go into specific roads now, Justin, do we? So I'll see you in range at 50.
And you want to list here, Chair, just what's your email address there?
Yeah, I didn't want to quite get down that road just yet, but I think it is worthwhile asking division by division, and then we can go to our divisions and ask them where they plan to go to. Are members content with something around those, just to get us clarity as quickly as possible?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, AOB from the floor. Anything?
Just a real quick one. Jenny is quick. Yesterday's all-party group on youth participation we're in, and again the NI Youth Assembly were also in presenting. So they did pass remark that they're always keen to seek engagement with both committees and both with departments. Now, and again, to be fair, the infrastructure committee is good at being in contact. Maybe generally less so maybe the department, but it's just really to pass that on at any opportunities. These young people are very keen to engage, because ultimately this is something, what they may not affect. They cannot vote for us now, but what we decide on here is probably going to affect them in the next couple of years.
Daniel, really enjoy the rest of your experience. Hope that was enjoyable for you.
So just if whatever opportunities, I'm just thinking as well, the graduate driver's license possibly being one. I think Michael mentioned that, but just to pass that on would be really good. I think any engagement would be possible.
I think it's a good point, Andrew and Michael. I know that they give very good evidence to the Education Committee recently around a number of issues, and I think there are clearly things that overlap with the work of the Youth Assembly, whether it be access to public transport, the graduate driving licensing scheme, whatever that may be. So if there's scope to do so, I'm happy. I'm sure we are.
Chair, if the committee is content, if I sort of preemptively ask the Youth Assembly around graduated driving licences, we haven't received SL1 ones on that legislation yet, but if the committee is content, I preempt that by asking the Youth Assembly if they have a view.
That'd be great, thank you.
Okay. If there's no other business, members, the date, time and location of the next meeting is here today week, and so we'll see you all then. Thank you, everyone.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound.